the realm of the dead. Necropia is a realm for the dead, devoid of a single trace of life. A place where great winged beasts roamed without fear over a grand castle that stood upright in those barren lands. It was the sole castle of Necropia, containing things that cannot be fathomed. Endless golden pillars, beautiful ornaments and murals, the marble hall that sprawls out beneath, the intricately crafted glorious sculptures, and the symbol of absolute power, the master of it all. The wearer of the sparkling crown was the absolute ruler of Necropia, the Death King Karnak. He who transcended all and controlled death itself, sat in his mighty throne and finally realized after a century that humans were not made to control things such as death. Karnak had a flashback, and he recalled that in his human days, he had been the bastard child of a fallen noble family. He had lost his precious mother when he was young, then he faced various pressures from other nobles. Karnak grew to trust only himself and raised a strong desire for power in himself. Then, he came across a forbidden codex about necromancy and steered off the path of a human. Soon after, he drove every human in the kingdom to death, raising corpses to do his bidding. The fourth martial king and the 3 grand mages fought against him, resisting Karnak. The battle was furious, but the Lord of Death eventually converted them into his own subjects. However, the battle was not over, and the Guardians of the World also teamed up to stop him too. So, the Dark Lord turned the final remaining Guardian of the World, the Great Dragon Emperor Greteria, into his subject. He converted his own flesh into the Ascendant, Astra Schnapf, the most powerful undead, and he became the strongest Death King to ever exist. The sun set on the chessboard and the Death King proved victorious overall. Yes, he thought all was his and he enjoyed it too. However, since that time, it has been 70 years and his rotten body sits on an ancient throne, ruling over those who have long since passed away. He rests his head in his hands and wonders what he could do with a body made of only bone. He wonders how much longer this pointless act must continue. The longer he sits and ponders, the more he recalls his long-gone humanity. The warm sunshine and gentle breeze on his skin, the warmth of another human embracing him, or even the terrible pain, digging straight into his flesh. All of those sensations are long gone. He believes that any feeling at all would be better than the dry and empty life that he leads now. However, there is still hope for our dude, and he can only hope it succeeds. His gaze falls on the inscription on a carved stone. Suddenly, someone in armor appears before him and greets the Lord of the Dead. The armored person hails him as the ruler of life and death, and the conqueror of the lands. He greets His Majesty the Death King Karnak, with a small army of the dead behind him. The armored knight is Barrows, the head commander of the Legions of Death. The Lord of Death asks his commander if the preparations are ready. The commander expresses some shock, asking if something could be. The great king laughs and says that he has a good feeling about things this time, and his commander cheers him on in happy glee. He knows how long his lord has been waiting for this moment. The king has searched long and hard for a way to recover the pleasures of the flesh with Barrows. They had tried vampirism and even possession, but pleasures work by fulfilling a need that was lacking, and for ascended creatures like them, no method could fulfill their needs. However, because they were the ultimate ascendants, they could find a way to recover their pleasure. If they could not enjoy human pleasures because they were not human, then the Death King was going to turn back time to the days when he was human. A genius move. He told his commander that they would go back in time to the moment when he first gained the mana of darkness because he was not interested in going through his loser arc again. The commander did remind his lord that if they failed, there was the possibility that their existence would disappear. However, the Dark Lord was unafraid and instead asked his commander if he still had regrets in their current life, or if he was feeling chicken. Either way, the king was totally fine with leaving without him. The commander laughed and said he had no regrets, all or nothing, he would leave with his young master, who was not so young anymore. Excited to return to the old days, they both took a happy leap of faith and whooshed away, as they returned to a time when they lived like humans. As often happens with a rebirth, things got blurry for a moment, and our Death King heard a voice calling out to him. It was his commander calling for his young master to wake up, and our dude snapped his eyes open to see his commander relieved that he was awake. He groaned as he sat up, asking to confirm that it was his commander before him, because his face was familiar. Beaming, his commander confirmed his identity, saying it had been a while since he had that face. The commander also beams and proudly proclaims that his master's scrawny pompous face is just like he remembered it, and his master mutters that he has no sense of respect. He is also convinced that there is no way he looks that bad. Anyways, they have arrived at the right time, and our dude is elated to spot a special crested book. The book is the start of everything, and our dude walked the path of necromancy with knowledge from this codex. He decides to try it out in his new human body, and wiggles his fingers to activate his powers. The book becomes enwrapped in his power, however, to his almighty shock, the power is not at all what he expected. He is shocked at how little fire he can summon, while the commander points out that he is burning up the almighty guiding codex. Our dude doesn't care since he's memorized the whole thing anyway, and it contains forbidden knowledge. He's not about to share that with others. Besides, not much in the book is important, just the basics. It was better to just get rid of the whole thing than to leave a possibility that they'd have to deal with later. The commander is awed that his sparkling king planned out everything, and he grins that his young master looks more handsome than usual. Suddenly, the king's stomach growls and for a moment they are both too stunned to speak. A blush comes upon the ruler of death as he confesses that it has been a while since he heard such a sound, and his commander beams that they are hungry. They happily go out to search for something to eat, triumphant at their first quest for pleasures of the flesh. They head out to an inn that is surrounded by so many people, and the people in the inn are a little distracted as the two loudly proclaim their fascination over barley bread, which they now think is a masterpiece. They groan and cry over things that they can now taste clearly, and the commander sobs tears of joy. He screams out with mad tearful joy, saying the bread tastes good enough to die for. Even the king cannot help himself and he sobs as he reminds his commander that dying is not allowed, since he revived them for a reason. Anyway, gambling their lives was so worth it, and it tastes so good that tears block their eyes. The king is still crying because he knows how the commander feels, but he does remind him to watch what he eats because money does not fall from the sky. It would be best if the commander chewed the food like cud so that it would not finish fast. The commander also tells his young master to slow down, but the king feels like fainting in joy just smelling the food and he cannot control himself. At a nearby table, a waiter drops a huge dish of roast meat for a group of customers and our guys cannot help but gape at it in shock. They stare in shock at the glistening fattened chicken, as they had not realized this place was so high-end. Everything smells so good, and they wonder how much it costs. They know for sure that they cannot afford the meat, and guess the people ordering it must be from a fallen noble family. The king is so hungry that he starts contemplating homicide, and the commander leaps to remind him that they are way too poor to bail themselves out of jail. At their current strength, they would end up beaten by a gang of common thugs, so the commander takes a moment to look through the money they have left. They are rather downhearted about the whole thing and feel like poverty is a sin, while wondering if they ought to order another loaf of bread. However, on opening the purse of money, the commander's eyes widen in horror. He calls his young master and says that they have a problem. The king of death asks what he means, and the commander reveals that their time travel might have had a bit of an effect on things. Our dudes admit that the situation is definitely strange and something has gone wrong, because, as they look into their purse of coin, they find it packed and overflowing with silver coins. There's no way they would have this much money. The king wonders where things begin to go wrong. At the time, the Jestard family's financial state was poor, and his grandfather, Baron Grelid, started many businesses with the territory as collateral but failed all of them. That only left debts for his father, Baron Craput. Unfortunately, his father could not handle the ever-growing debts, and the sons of his original wife were two useless brats who were of no help at all to the family. Our dude was the bastard child, born into a collapsing family, and he received all of the family's scorn and persecution and barely managed to endure each day. At least, that's what he remembered their family's state to be, so he wondered why things would be different. He has no idea where they could have gotten all the money that they now have. He says this is not something to be happy about as it might mean that he did the spell wrongly. However, the commander is just a swordsman, so he knows nothing of spells and cannot give an opinion on the matter. This makes the king wonder if they really came back to the past as he rubs his hair with frustration. However, focusing on the good things in life, the commander then asks if they can now eat chicken. The king is successfully distracted by this new score as the commander says they should go ahead and spend the money since their problems won't get magicked away. Our king's heart and soul are immediately stolen by the king chicken, and his mouth waters as he agrees that they have to eat well to be able to resolve their concerns. The commander asks if they should get one, but the king says that clearly they ought to get one per person. They happily order 2 whole chickens with reckless abandon. As the sun sets, both our heroes are thoroughly stuffed and laugh with glee about it. The commander's stomach is so full that he might even go into a food coma. The king smiles and says that they should be able to pass out and sleep once they return. The commander is not very pleased to return to his boss family, and he really would prefer not to see them again as he finds them annoying. He is sure they must be the same as ever, and he hates them for it. The king just reminds him that they will be fine as long as they such up to them. The problem is how strange the situation is, and even the commander agrees that it is not just 1 or 2 things that are weird. The horse as well is a little strange, because the stage station manager was buttering up to them, promising to feed their horses well. It makes no sense that a fallen family would have horses of such good breed, though they paid the station manager a lot since he worked hard. The citizens they bumped into earlier, those who used to scorn them and call them the scoundrel and his attendant, when they saw them this time, they were so happy to see them that they teared up. It was like being in a nightmare. The king admitted that he felt uneasy about the whole thing, but they would find out what all the fuss was about as soon as they returned home. They were almost there, and in the distance, they saw a magnificent structure being highlighted by the glow of the sun. The king smiles as he confesses that it has been a while since he last saw his former home, and it all feels strangely nostalgic. However, the commander still only feels annoyed as he has very few good memories while there. Barrows was also an orphan at the time, so he did not live a comfortable life. His parents had been absolute scumbags before abandoning their son in the middle of the night. The young king was the one to discover the young commander as he was close to dying. Afterwards, he brought the boy back home with him, and their father surprisingly allowed it, since, even if he is an illegitimate child, the family had to save face, and he would need an attendant of some sort. As he ponders this, he hears his commander calling out to him and turns to hear him out. The commander asks, just to be sure, that they are at the residence of the gestured family. The king asks what the commander means by asking that question and says that it should be obvious, but his voice falls away as he regards the grand mansion before him. For a moment, they can only gape and wonder if they came to the wrong place. However, it is still the place of the king's memories. He recognizes the tall brick wall, the two-story building with a terrace, and an extensive garden that surrounds it. Everything about the mansion was the same, other than the fact that the place was now surprisingly splendid and overflowing with riches. It seemed they had completely spruced it up, and he wondered where they got the money for this. The guards waiting at the door immediately identify him with glee and joy in their eyes. He feels unsettled that even the gatekeeper welcomes him. However, one of the guards scolds the other gatekeeper for the greeting. The other gatekeeper then quickly changes the greeting style, and they instead bow their heads low in adoration, welcoming their lord home. This behavior was even more surprising to our two dudes, and they had no idea what to make of it. Their faces were shocked and they gaped back at the bowing men in disbelief, unable to believe what was happening. Once inside, it was explained that it was already half a year since the Death King became the head of the family. They are both shocked and confused to hear this, and the butler smiles, asking the young master if he achieved his goal. The butler was called Japel Played, and the king asks on what goal he is referring to. The butler is surprised, saying the goal was the reason the young lord started his journey. The king quickly agrees and the butler smiles in relief, saying that the late lord and Isabella would have been glad. This surprises the two even more and they stare in profound shock, as our dude wonders why and how his father and stepmother died. The butler goes on to explain that after Tessel and Ferelth passed away, times were looking grim. But the butler feels better now, and our dude at least now understands how he ended up the lord. He folds his hands into a fist, wondering why his entire family died. The goal of his journey was obvious. It must have been to master necromancy while no one was looking, which was why they'd awoken in front of the forbidden book. His commander also knows this and whispers that it made sense that his boss kept the true reason for the journey, and he'd just make up nonsense about going on a journey. However, our dude still cannot understand why he'd need to learn necromancy in a situation where everything seems perfect. The butler asks them both what they are worried about, and the commander jumps in to say that the young master is so exhausted from the lord's journey, and they can continue this conversation tomorrow. The butler gasps in horror and quickly apologizes for failing to consider that. He tells them to hurry and go rest in their room, and they do as they're told. Behind closed doors, they high-five each other with glee, congratulating each other for successfully buying some time away from their watchers. They got out of that situation for now, but the commander asks our king what he's going to do now, because things are worse. Everything the butler was saying was so new that now he had no idea what was going on. The king smirks and says there is a method for times like this, and he asks his commander if he knows what they need to prepare now. They hurry to do it while everyone is asleep. That night, when the moon is high in the sky over the family estate, the butler sleeps soundly in his little sleep hat. Meanwhile, our two heroes are up to no good, and they confirm that the butler is fast asleep. Then, the commander announces that he has prepared the herbs, although it took a while to get them. The king then says it is time to commence the mind inspection, and he activates the ability. Magic floods the bowl with the herbs, and it slips into the nose of the sleeping butler as the Death King calls him to awaken. The butler's eyes snap open, but there is an inhuman element to him now as he responds and calls the young lord his master. The young king then asks the butler to explain the whole process of how Jestard's finances improved, and how he became the head of the household. The butler then explains that 4 years ago, while the second young master was training, he coincidentally came across a large-scale copper mine. Our dude is surprised to hear of this discovery, as they thought mines were just an excuse that nobles used to hide dirty money. Even the commander thought so, but he guessed this was a rare case where they came across a copper mine. Then, our dude asks how his entire family died in the short span of 4 years, and the butler explains that the problem was the location of the copper mine. It was located in the neutrality zone between the Jestard family and the Deventer family. The two families claimed that the mine was theirs, and this conflict led to a war between the two families. The Deventers had always been consistent with their military training, and no one could defeat Sir Randolph of the Deventers. He slayed the Baron kaput easily, and even killed the young Master Tessel, the oldest son of the family, the household's best knight. Second young Master Ferelth also lost his 2 legs because of Sir Randolph, and because of this, he took his own life. Then the Baroness was shocked by all of this and passed away not long after. In the end, the young Master Karnak was chosen to be the successor despite being a minor. The two families then promised a ceasefire until he was of age again and became the official head of the household. They even shook hands on the matter. However, everyone was worried about the copper mine and the promise of compensation for the war. That is when the young Master Karnak came up with a solution to save the family, and he requested a trial duel against Viscount Deventer in the name of Allium, the goddess of the moon and justice. This is where our young king has to stop the story immediately in horror, gaping as he asks about what duel he agreed to, and even the commander agrees that such a thing sounds so rash. The trial duel is a duel carried out under the mandates of the Allium Order. It is possible to substitute a warrior in his stead, and it is carried out under the presence of the Allium priest, and the victor is decided through the death of one side. The commander is indeed disappointed to hear his young lord has already dug his own grave, although our dude insists that was not him, and he groans as he realizes this is why everyone suddenly likes him. It is a losing fight. That's why he must have chosen the path of death magic instead of continuing the war. The defenders could not have refused such an offer since it would ruin their image if they did. But if our king could win the duel and secure the copper mine as a result, it would help them avoid starvation. However, with the king's current skill level, he is bound to end up dead in the duel. That's why the king makes plans to prepare as best as he can, and asks when the duel starts. The butler informs him that it will take place in a month, and our dude groans that the time is way too close. Even his personal cheerleader is worried. The next day, a large spread of juicy food and treats are prepared and laid before the commander Barrows, who squeals like an excited high school girl. The king prepared it all for his second in command, saying he works hard all the time so he deserves it. The commander is elated and happily digs in, asking if it is okay for the king to be resting when the date of the duel is so near. He also gushes about the sweet food, as his king reassures him that everything is fine. After all, his commander will be fighting in his stead. Then, he casually hands him a cup of tea to help him choke down the betrayal. Getting a substitute is allowed in the rules after all, but the commander is disappointed by his king's attempts at bribery and declines. The king is horrified, saying that his commander once slew 3 of the 4 martial kings. However, the commander points out that it was all thanks to the king's necromancy, and that he could not gain martial prowess from just experience alone. It would be meaningless for him to learn advanced swordsmanship if he had no arms, though that was a dramatic example. He could make do if he had half a year to train, but there's no way the commander can train enough to beat the defenders in a month. The king sulks and snatches the food away, saying the commander cannot eat if he won't fight. The commander then suggests that they get a knight in the order to fight for them, and the king complains that if there was someone that talented, then he would not be asking his commander to do it. Our king now has only one choice: he must use necromancy. The commander understands why the king got to learning it now, but there is a problem. Necromancy is totally banned. In the past, when they were on the run from diligent pursuers who refused to lose track of them, because they sought to catch the king, believing they would be blessed by allium, they managed to eliminate the household stealthily by using necromancy, but the priests of allium singled the king out as the culprit, and they had to run in the dead of night. The priests were certain of the king's identity as a necromancer, and he was forced to use his necromancy in front of them, bringing rise to the wandering souls and making them do his bidding. He pulled up the resentful wraith spirits, and the priests were horrified to have their suspicions confirmed. They yelled out that he was using evil magic and got ready to fight back. They raised the guardian plaques, which were the holy relics of the allium order that wards off evil. The priests were shocked to see that the goddess blessing was not working, and the king stretched out his magic-filled hands. He took out many of the knights as they screamed in agony, then they ran, hoping to avoid the other team before they caught up. The king still could not fathom how the priests found out that he was the one using necromancy when the book had made it clear that no one would know. However, the commander realized that only civilians would have no idea, but mages and knights would know, so people like priests were an exception. The king was horrified to hear this. He had clearly not paid attention to the fine print. Recalling that time makes the commander laugh because it was very tortuous back then. That moment became the beginning of a legend. The plan was to stealthily use necromancy while pretending to engage in normal combat. However, if the judges of the trial duel are the priests, then he would just repeat the past, and he does not want to live life on the run again, especially since life is so sweet now. However, the airhead commander suggests that they just grab some money and run, leaving the people with their problems. The king isn't down with it, though. All the people he hates are dead and the people here like him now. The commander cannot believe that the king will somehow keep up the act of a good patriarch when he's about to die in a death match. The king complains that he's not pretending to be good, and that the commander makes him sound like a villain. Then he calls out for Barrows to sit back down, because things might be dangerous, but he finally has an idea. At the northern fort of Deventer, the training fighters take a short break. They collapse to the ground in relief, and Randolph, Deventer's strongest knight, is asked how the preparations for the trial duel are going. He greets Sir Bright and asks what preparations he would need to make against someone so unskilled. It would be ridiculous for him to waste his time because of a spoiled and foolish young master who knows nothing about the world. Sir Bert does not think Sir Randolph can lose, but the new lord must surely have a plan when he requested the duel. A merchant suddenly shows up, and they have been getting a lot of outsiders in the front yard lately. It is also very distracting, and the fighters are told to get back to their positions. Meanwhile, the trader who is selling items very cheap is just the commander in disguise, and now he understands what they need to do. It was a good thing that the commander decided to snoop around there. Randolph might not be powerful in combat, but in a one-on-one battle, his opponent actually had a chance of winning. He is the simple foolish type who uses typical heavy sword techniques, and he hasn't even learned battle aura yet. It is easy to predict the movements of opponents like him, and that is a good thing for him. As it is, just 1 month still won't be enough, but before he can do more assessment, a lady calls out to him, and she asks if he has any business with her brother since he keeps glaring at Randolph. For a moment, our commander dude is too stunned to speak, but then he hops to his feet and recognizes Randolph's little sister. She asks if he has any business with him, and he just says that he is taken by the vigor of the North's strongest knight. He then asks if the lady would like to buy a handkerchief from him, as he will happily give it to her at a special price. The lady cannot resist the beautiful spread of fabric and picks out one that looks good. Fortunately, she did not catch on to his ruse. Later, at the Jestard estate, in the personal drill hall, the commander returns and asks his young master if his stamina training is going well. He returns to find his young master turning into a dehydrated corpse, much to his horror. He begs his young master to please arise, and the master also begs him not to shake him or he's going to throw up. The commander asked if his master ran 50 laps around the drill hall as he told him to, and the king admitted that he just finished the laps and collapsed. He could not run anymore. The commander complains that the king lacks stamina, and the king asks why he has to train like this in the first place. So, his buddy explains that he cannot do anything with his shrimp-like body right now, the training is not meaningless and the king must not stop. The king insists that he must rest first or he will surely die. However, the commander insists that the real training has only just begun. Much to his king's horror, he explains that the king was just doing rehab, and he unlocks his demonic side as he asks his king if he is ready to start the training proper. They have 20 days until the duel, and they first make sure that the king eats a filling breakfast every morning, though the king is a little shocked to see his commander scarfing down meat as the first thing in the morning. After that, they go to the drill hall and do 100 push-ups, the commander doing it so fast while the king is about to pass out. Then, they match that with 100 pole swings, which the commander does happily with a giant concrete pile, while our king struggles with his simple pole. They proceed to 100 squats which, again, the commander excels at while our king suffers. Right after that, the king demands a break, and the commander concedes that they will take a break. The great king of death sits in a corner and tries not to evaporate. After that, they eat another heavy meat-based meal, and go right back to the push-ups as soon as they are done. Then they rotate back to the pole swings and then the squats. After that, they take another break, they eat, and the torture restarts itself. 15 days before the duel and our king is finally catching up, lifting 2 heavy bags on his shoulder as he does the squats. The commander is impressed by the stamina that his young master has built, and the king says of course since he has trained so much, though he is still lacking compared to Barrows who has now become very bulky. The commander explains that it is because he did twice the training. Now, he is ready to train our dude in sword fighting, and the king is curious about swordsmanship. He holds the sword for the first time, and his commander inspects his form. Finally, he is disappointed as he admits that it is a mess. The king's arms are trembling. He is looking at something else. His shoulders are not relaxed. He needs to put his weight on his heels, bend his knees and tense his arms. Again, the king is asked to raise his sword and he cannot believe how strict his commander is. Now that he is finally looking decent, he tells him that if he maintains this stance, then he won't be beheaded in one attack. The commander then says that he will attack, so he asks his dude to prepare himself. The king says that he will counter, but the commander suddenly swings him in a neat and deadly arc that makes instant painful contact. The commander asks his king what he is doing and tells him to get into his stance. He will not hold back and his barrage of attacks makes it difficult for his lord to counter. The only thing that he can do is maintain his stance, but he keeps getting knocked about left, right and center. Finally, the king grunts in pain as he takes an attack that knocks him down. He falls, dropping his sword, while his commander stands with only a pole as his weapon. Barrows explains that this is the reason why knights can have a field day against civilians, because they will not give their opponent the chance to counterattack at all, so the king needs to hold his stance and dodge the subsequent attack. However, the dude points out that even if he holds his stance, he cannot dodge the next attack. Of course, the goal of the training at the end is to show his fighting will to Randolph. The king asks if there is any need for that in the duel, and the commander explains that the great knight has a habit of showing off. So, he will try to show off his skills in front of the spectators while toying with his opponent. However, it is different if his opponent loses their will to fight. A drawn-out fight with someone like that will damage his honor, so he will try to defeat that opponent right away. The king needs to show him that he will not give up, and he must do that so that he does not die with one hit. He really has his work cut out for him. Time passes, and they have 5 days before the duel. The king has never once slacked in his training and he now stands with a shield, a sword, and a battle cry. He can finally launch attacks at his pole-wielding commander, who goads him to shout louder. The king cries out, dodging as his commander swings and again shouts for him to be louder. The king must make sure that he is heard. He dodges attacks, and blocks attacks that he cannot dodge with his shield. He falls and rolls ridiculously, crying out and groaning in pain as he falls. His commander yells out that he must not dream about taking a slash, or he will just be sliced. The king must always roll on the ground, though he hates how stupid he will look doing that. 4 days to the duel, and our king continues to practice his rolls as his commander takes a slash at him. 3 days to the duel, and the king has gotten much better at rolling. 2 days to the duel, and rolling has become an art form that the king has perfected. He expertly rolls away from every form of danger, somehow making it look cool now. He thinks he might end up dying before he even fights his opponent because of how intense the training is. The commander says that the king is just about ready and asks if he is ready to get into the final part. He will now teach the king about the 4 martial kings' sword techniques. The king is surprised to hear of the 4 martial kings and that his commander knows such a thing. His commander takes the time to remind him that knows most techniques. The 4 martial kings were all his underlings and he has learnt all of their techniques except for the martial king Rapseal. When the king asks why he has failed to learn her technique, the commander reminds him that he did not turn her into a death knight. She resisted till the end, so the king cut her into thirds and made her into a palace gatekeeper. The king then recalled what he'd done and wondered if that made him cruel. Anyway, for today, he must focus on learning the martial king Levin's Delphiad sword technique. The king wonders if he can possibly learn that in just 2 days, but the commander smirks and says they need just 1 day. Time passes and the day of the duel arrives. Many people gather around a huge fancy stage that has been set up at the Deventer and Jestard border. Some of the knights think it will be fun and ask who will win, but most of them are sure it will be Sir Randolph, and that most of the match would be boring. Some of the Jestard people are worried for their lord and hope that he wins since they saw him training hard, so they'll just have to believe in him. Meanwhile, the king steps out into the open field and calls out to his commander, who replies with an agreement. All the townspeople are gathered around the stage, and an elder strikes a staff on the ground to stop the commotion. He tells the onlookers to be silent in the presence of Allium, and that both houses have claimed ownership of the copper mines, and thus requested a trial. The ownership of the mine will be decided through combat, and Karnak of House Jestard comes forward to face the goddess. Karnak is our Death King and he hopes that things go well. Meanwhile, Sir Randolph of Deventer comes forward and faces the goddess. Before the fight, according to the rules, a handicap in equipment has been applied based on the fighter's abilities. The fighters are asked by the overseeing priest if they pledge to fight honorably, and they both swear it. With the warrior's pledge, the priest hopes the scales of justice will seek out the truth. With that, the trial by combat begins. The 2 fighters face up and square up, with the Deventer champion leering at our dude. The sky is clear and the grass is green around the stage. However, the Deventer champion grins and says that it changes nothing, so he runs forward and swings his mighty sword. He screams again that it changes nothing as he brings down his mighty sword on our dude's shield and he groans. Our dude smirks and replies that they will only know if that changes nothing once they see things through, goading his opponent, who laughs and says that our dude is not all talk. However, the Deventer champion is relentless and dashes at our dude with various heavy strikes. The crowd is happy that the Lord seems to be putting up a decent fight and is holding his own well. They cheer that they knew there was something different about him, and the commander thinks to himself that the start of the fight is going as he expected it to. Not especially fast or threatening. An experienced swordsman can easily tell that Sir Randolph was still scouting his opponent out. The king wonders if he should stick to what he trained for, or if he should try his new move now. He decides to show them his will to fight and screams into the air, telling his opponent to come at him. Sir Randolph grinned to see his opponent's eyes full of determination, though his skills are lacking. But he's got the spirit. He decides to take it up a notch and raises his sword high. The king is shocked to see his opponent's sword energy suddenly increase, and he realizes that he cannot block it with his shield. The sword comes swinging and he curses. It is now time to employ the other thing he learned. When the sword came crashing down, the king utilized his speed roll and got out of the way before danger could strike. He skidded to a stop, striking a cool pose once he was out of harm's way. Of course, his opponent was not very pleased about that, and she was very confused. Everyone seemed okay with the fact that he just rolled out of the way, even though they laughed a bit about it. They thought that their lord was really dexterous. Even the priests had never seen anything like that and felt rather amazed. Then, our Death King tossed his shield aside, declaring that his opponent was nothing and that he did not even need his shield to fight him. He laughed, stretched out his sword, and called Randolph so slow that he thought he was a turtle. He laughs that a muscular pig like him has no business calling himself a knight. That's when his opponent rages and calls him a cheeky fatherless child, which is a little on the nose with our dude's backstory. He will not let the Death King mock him, and he will make sure that our dude cannot run his mouth anymore. The Death King grins and tells him to try his worst, and his opponent fills with rage. However, he sees our dude strike up a familiar stance, and immediately recognizes the Delphiad sword technique. It was a stance created by the martial king Levin, and even the civilians are shocked to see their lord strike up the stance of a martial king. They are so impressed that their lord has been training with the techniques of the martial kings in order to defend them, and they think that he might actually win. However, the Deventer fighter merely grins that he nearly fell for a taunt. He just needs to stay calm and focused. The sword technique of the martial kings can only be used by geniuses with real battle experience, and our king right now looks far from capable of using it properly. He does not know how our dude learnt the technique, but his opponent is sure that it will not guarantee his victory. He commends his effort in learning a martial king's technique, and he announces that he will enact justice in the name Allium on the new lord of the Jestard estate, confident that he cannot defeat him. Even our dude trembles at the way his opponent glares at him, worried that his new move would not be enough to take him down. He was doubtful about learning the technique in 1 day, but his commander assured him that he just needed to roughly copy it. He would not have to pick up a sword again once it was over, it was just to show enough skill to make people think he has been training. Their real plan lies elsewhere, and the king thinks of his commander at that moment, saying that his commander forgot to warn him that he would end up beaten up so terribly in his attempt to copy a martial style. He can barely hold his own against the large, powerful, and confident opponent who is determined to cut him dead. Still, our king must do what needs to be done. And he cries, saying this is nothing to the Knight of Deventer. He shouts that he cannot be defeated by something so small, and his opponent becomes angry. He knows our dude is getting completely beaten up, yet he still has the gall to talk smack, saying that the sword of Jestard will never fail. The people are so moved to see their master struggle so much, and they cry from passion as they think he is perfectly suitable to be their lord, even if he is rather stupid and keeps goading his opponent. The commander is demonically proud that his king is not taking any hits. All the time spent beating him up paid off, and the king screams for the knight to come at him. The king was always pretty good at talking smack, and the opponent groans that he is too irritated to keep this up. He yells that the Death King looks like he is on his last breath and has no room to be talking trash. The opponent has finally had enough and he is determined to end the fight once and for all. He leaps ahead and the commander grins with joy as the moment has finally come. He yells for his lord to brace himself, and the king realizes that it is time. Even if the king can mimic the moves, without a proper strike, everyone will see through his tricks. So, his commander will show him exactly what to do. Randolph goes for his legs to end the fight, just as his buddy predicted, and he is doing that to limit our guy's movements. At the right moment, our guy must shift into a defensive stance and stab his sword into the ground, which would immediately block his opponent's attack and destabilize Randolph for a bit. The angry blonde cannot believe that a newbie was able to block that. Immediately after that, our guy swings his sword upward in a diagonal arc and slams it against his opponent's weapon. Then, he must quickly switch his grip, just like they practiced, and strike once more, slashing the Deventer fighter in a double uppercut overkill. Blood splashes on the floor, and our dude is panting. However, the blonde competitor just laughs and asks him if that is all he's got, saying that a kitten scratching would do better, and our dude groans because the blonde is still standing tall. Randolph laughs boastfully at our dude, and he has to wonder if this is the end. The crowd watching sighs with concern as it seems the match has come to an end, and the people of Jestard are worried that miracles do not exist, and that reality is cruel and unfair. The Deventer champion goes on to say that our dude let his guard down, so he will be sure that the king will be made fun of by his fellow peers. Our dude responds that his life is at risk, and yet this dude is concerned for his social image. That's when the king grins and says that it is not so bad after all, and he will not have to feel sorry for the blonde jerk afterwards. For a moment, the blonde is confused and wonders why our dude suddenly looks so terrifying. That is when the necromancy on his cut activates, and he screams in pain as his chest suddenly bursts with dark magic. The priests are immediately on their guard because they recognize the aura. The blonde tries valiantly to fight against the darkness around him. However, our dude shifts the blame and says that he won't lose to the blonde no matter what dirty tricks he has up his sleeve. Our guy launches at Randolph while he is still distracted from fighting the necromancy, but he somehow gets knocked away, making a huge show of his opponent using necromancy against him. The crowd starts to wonder how a human can possess such strength, and they think the black aura is being controlled by Randolph. Our commander from the crowd then seals the poor blonde's fate by yelling out that he is using necromancy, the power of the devil. The priests are ordered to hurry and defeat Randolph, who is actually fighting for his life against the necromancy. They race at him and tell him to stop this evil in the name of Allium. They swear to bring judgment and justice to unclean beings, and tell him to put down his sword and surrender. Instead, he demands what the heck they are talking about and blows them away with one swipe of his hand. The priests get knocked back, and they are sure without a doubt that he is using necromancy. However, the poor blonde still has no idea what is going on. He is trying to figure out what our Death King did to him, because he knows this is our guy's doing. Meanwhile, our guy is over by the corner, laughing maliciously, thinking that Randolph should be causing a scene like this. A dark aura wraps around Randolph who struggles, and a priest points out that it looks like he is being controlled by the curse. However, the high priest says this is because he is unskilled at controlling the power, so they have no choice but to kill him when the opportunity arrives. Randolph screams as the power consumes him, and he cries out in fear, but the priest lashes out at him and spears him to death, making him cough up blood. The darkness fades from him, and the blonde stands executed in the center of the fighting ring. For a moment, there is silence as the people watch on. He is no longer breathing, so the knights ask what they should do. The head priest says they will send officials to the estate of Viscount Deventer and have them investigate thoroughly. A verdict has been reached, and the fighter of Deventer has called upon a dark power and has dueled in this holy trial, which was a disgrace to their goddess name. The fighter of Jestard, Baron of Karnak, is therefore proclaimed the victor. In the Deventer estate, the priests discovered blankets and cloaks with necromancy symbols on them, and there was evidence all through the estate. The servants were in disbelief and Randolph's younger sister protested that they only recently bought these things from a peddler. Then they asked about the suspicious bottle of medicine from her brother's room, and she thought it was just a hair growth formula since he was always worried about hair loss. However, the priests are convinced that these are clear evidence of necromancy, and a hearing shall be held soon. A few days later, at the estate of Jestard, Barrows and our dude help themselves to a feast fit for champions, which they find amazing compared to the food they ate while they were training. They happily munch away, celebrating their victory. They say it is fine for them to pig out since they are sure a feast is also going on in the town square. Barrows asks his young master how he thought of a spell like that, and the young lord confesses that he needed to do anything to win. 1 month ago, the king confessed that he was going to use necromancy and his commander could not believe it. However, the king asked him to hear him out. The death sentence would come if he was caught using necromancy, but also if he failed the trial, so in his opinion, it was better to use necromancy. However, he has already planned that his opponent would be the one seen to be using necromancy. His commander asks him what he has in mind, and he says he will put on an act. With how far the officials are, he should be able to fool them, and it would be hard to tell who is using the spell. It is an incredibly strong and high-level necromancy spell, so even the order won't suspect that he was behind it. However, there was only one issue. In order to do the spell, he needs his opponent to spill blood, but his blade can't get close with his current skills. However, the commander beams saying getting his opponent to bleed is no problem. He managed to train his young lord enough to make him happen, though his king had a horrible time and thinks his commander is worse than the devil. The commander says our dude must be glad that he put in that much effort. I think Randall should have been able to win without necromancy, but they escaped suspicion and all they did was investigate the Deventers, convinced that their opponent used necromancy. Our dude wonders why that was the case, and for that, we go to the Jessalyn Grand Temple and headquarters of the Order of Allium. The priest asks if they were done investigating the Deventers' dark powers, since this is a big issue. Only facts that were confirmed were to be reported. From experience in their investigations, they were certain that this was not from any ordinary necromancer. Using the fragment of the Transcendent, the goddess warned them that the attributes matched perfectly with the darkness of the apocalypse. However, our dude is still winning and dining obliviously, believing that luck is on his side. The world is in their favor, and all they need to do now is to enjoy life to the fullest. With the Deventer family gone, the commander warns that there are plenty of powers that will try to take over the mines. This is why our dude will grow his strength in necromancy, so the commander points out that it would be dangerous if the order found out about that. Then, our dude smirks and says that he needs to find a way to use necromancy without getting caught. 3 months later, our dude continues to study necromancy. He has to focus on the negative energy from the moonlight, the darkness of the deep night, and he calls upon the corrupt energy to filter it all. Then he collects all the pure energy left behind. Finally, they sort through and reprocess it to create magic, and magic lights up in his hand, much to his glee. He had finally achieved chaos magic. The commander keeps up his training to build physical strength, and it has already been 3 months since he started training as a soldier. In order to become an official knight of Jestard, there was no helping it. The problem was that the abilities of the soldiers were pathetic. The Jestard senior soldier, Gilliman, finally called for a break, and the commander figured that they got all the support they needed this time, so there was no helping the situation. The senior soldier begs to end things early that day, so the commander agrees to take a break. He thanked the senior soldier for giving him some time, and the man laughed that he felt embarrassed and that he needed to learn from the commander instead. Barrows has grown incredibly in just 3 months, and they say he will soon be the strongest knight of Jestard. However, he says he still has a long way to go, but the senior soldier tells him not to be modest, and that he will be a good knight. The soldiers are getting a drink together that day, and they ask if he wants to come. The commander has to decline though, since he has been assigned by the young master to an important task. It is a shame, but the senior soldier wishes him farewell and says they will meet again the next day. Meanwhile, the very important engagement turns out to be snack time with the young master, which the commander is very excited about. He nearly gets knocked down by a blast of fire and screams in horror, and the young master screams that he should have knocked first. Recovering, the commander asks what technique his young lord was using because it did not look like necromancy. The Death King is proud of his deduction because it is difficult to consider his new magic as necromancy. After all, it is more akin to mana, and he waves it around the room, much to his commander's awe. He is surprised that his lord can use mana without switching his power. There are 4 ways to transcend the human force in this world: a knight's battle aura, a mage's mana, a cleric's divinity, and necromancy, which deals with the force of death and darkness. This transcendent force accumulates only the energy that is suitable to the force in a person's body. Once enough force has been accumulated, it will be transformed into a power, because a power is optimized to what suits the user's soul and body best. One cannot use another power once their soul has already been bestowed one. Once a person chooses their power, it cannot be changed. However, our dude insists that he did not change his power, it is just in its 2nd stage. Necromancy, which uses death energy and corrupt energy, is literally dirty mana. That is why he works well with it, since he had a rotten upbringing. However, there are foods that are made using nasty methods, like fermented foods. This power has also been processed so that it does not feel dirty or gross. It filters away the originally negative emotions like hate and grudges, leaving only the pure energy of darkness and death, then transforming it into mana. That is how Chaos Mana was completed, and from its appearance, it looks similar to normal mana, so he has named it Chaos Mana. The commander agrees that it does feel closer to mana, so our dude will pretend to be a mage now. However, the commander asks if he can mimic the amount of strength he had back then with his chaos mana. The Death King waggles his finger and says that with a lot of power comes a big incident, and right now, all he needs is enough power to protect their territory. At the Gestured territory in the western forest, the soldiers manage to hunt down all the monsters in the mines, and they are now ready to pull out. One knight is determined to make the report himself, and he does not see the monster lurking in the bushes behind him. It leaps out suddenly with a mighty roar, and the man turns after the others warn him to look behind him, and he sees the horrible creature. However, Barrows leaps into action and swings his mighty sword, slaying the evil beast. The creature's body falls to the ground, and the commander apologizes for being late and asks Gilliman if he is okay. Gilliman is relieved and grateful that the commander has joined them. The commander laughed and admitted that it hasn't been long since he became a knight, so it still feels a little awkward and embarrassing. However, he recalls that the senior soldier reported that the state of the monsters is strange these days, and the snarls have gotten at least twice as strong. They think a rumor is true, and the rumor is that of the goddess Oracle, the Oracle of Destruction that the 7 goddesses who protect the world and humanity sent down to the Order. It says that emptiness will open its mouth and vomit a fate that is not allowed, and this will be a darkness that erases light, a darkness that reaps life. In time, hardships will arise, and wrong beasts will obtain wrong power, and the dead will awaken and walk the wrong land. The King of Death will come down and paint the world with blood and tears, and he will become the end that speaks of destruction. After the goddess Oracle, monsters from a nearby continent went rampant and launched various attacks. Necromancers also became uncontrollable and caused accidents to occur all around. The continent's religious orders announced the Oracle in order to prevent chaos, and began to fight against the chaos using the blessing of a goddess to protect the world. There was no such oracle before regressing, and they wonder why the past is continuously changing. Even the Death King is a bit annoyed that they do not have enough information. The rumors are totally talking about them, but the time period does not line up. The oracle was from way before they regressed, so this is the reason that the Randolph incident moved on easily. However, the commander worries they might have something to do with the world's collapse after going through all the trouble to regress. However, the king says that they are mere bastards from the countryside and they surely cannot cause all that trouble. They are not sure who the King of Death of this world will be, but destroying the world is not that easy. Besides, there are a lot of heroes around and they are sure that the humans will figure themselves out without their aid. They decide to trust the forces of the world, stay in their territory, and just enjoy their lives. 7 days later, someone arrives from the goddess of the sun's order, and he says that he wants their cooperation for a cause. They feel screwed now that a priest has shown up at their front door. He said that they found that a necromancer that was active in Darth City ran away to Gestured, and they believe he is hiding in a nearby forest, so he has come to ask for a guide. The commander immediately thinks that have to reject the dude as naturally as possible. However, the Death King sets down his cup of tea and says he could not reject affairs concerning a goddess, much to his commander's horror. He will send a person to guide them, and they are grateful for his cooperation. The priest wishes them goodbye and his commander confronts him for his decision to intervene with worldly matters. However, the Death King thinks it is a good opportunity to get a grasp on the situation with one person. Our dude plans to catch the necromancer first and then screw him up. He plans to show the poor guy what real power looks like. Meanwhile, the necromancer runs in the forest, hoping that he lost all the pursuers. He thinks the priests are like dogs of a goddess, and he finally thought he'd get to stop living like a beggar, but they immediately started chasing him. He will make sure to survive and get revenge. However, the knights corner and tell him that he has come to his end. He curses and realizes that he walked into a trap, and the priests say that they will not forgive any further commotion. They tell him to surrender, and he growls saying he will not let himself get caught here. He unleashes his necromancer power against them, and the knights scream when they see a wraith. They pull out their protection charms, but the man flings the demonic power at them and they groan in pain. Our guy watches from above and says that this is driving him insane. He sits on a tree with his commander and grinds his teeth in hatred to see that the man's words and spell technique are all wrong. The commander says he obviously did not learn the standard procedure, considering the magic is illegal. The commander thinks they should get started soon. They saw the necromancer dude running off, and they moved in pursuit. They grin and plan to get ahead of them before they subdue him. Inside the dark hole of a dark cave, the rookie necromancer scurries inside to hide. He spent more power than he expected to spend, so he needs to lay low for a while. He also feels some warmth nearby and he drifts closer so he can start a fire and get warm. However, he freezes when he happens upon our dude who sits in the cave by a lit fire. They even voice out that they were worried he would be late. They tell him that he's got a keen eye since he stumbled into their usual hideout. They even commend him for making it this far on his first time on the run. The dude is shocked and asks what they are, and our dude just grins and says that there are people out to get him. This makes the rookie wary and he thinks that they are trying to mess with him. So, he brings forth his servants of wraiths in a large display of power. He decides to use them to buy time and starts to run away, saying that the brats brought it on themselves. The commander is impressed with the number of wraiths that he can summon, and that he cannot cut through spirits with a sword. The Death King advises him to stay put because it is now the perfect time for him to test his chaos mana. Meanwhile, the rookie necromancer bolts out of the cave in relief, sure that the two he met will be caught up for a bit. However, he freezes when he hears an odd sound and sees the wraiths running to him, followed by an explosion of mana. He stares in shock as the two emerge and the king asks him where he is running to. The king had successfully tested his conceal and explode magic. He had sent fireballs falling on every multiple wraiths, then they had all detonated like bombs. The necromancer was horrified to find a mage out in the wilderness, and was upset that he was stronger than he thought. At this rate, he was going to get caught unless he did something new. So, he declares that he will show them the true power of death and summons an evil spirit. The two watch and mumble that the young ones have so much energy. The king wonders why he's calling a wraith an evil spirit. The rookie grins, thinking he can see fear in their faces. However, the king is offended by that statement. The rookie laughs that it is much too late for them to beg for their lives, and tells the stronger wraith to attack them. It launches itself at the two who await its approach, and our dude lowers his head as it comes at him. Then he calls out, opens his demonic eye, and angrily gives the order to kneel. The wraith crashes to the ground immediately, surprised that it cannot rise and trembling under the king's immense power. The rookie is shocked that our dude is also a necromancer, and the king mutters that the rookie is so clueless for taking so long to figure it out. He activates some green mana and laughs that the rookie has no idea what that is either. Over a demonic symbol, the spell of misdirection activates, and a huge claw hovers over the necromancer. The king says that it is his specialty, and the rookie screams when the claw grabs him and he is unable to move. The rookie's body lays flat before them, and when he rises, he obeys his master, the Death King. The king asked how he gained his necromancy powers, and the rookie explained that it was a stroke of luck. He was drowning his sorrows in the streets as usual when suddenly a darkness from an alley engulfed him. An unknown power began to course through his body, and he realized that it was the authority of the apocalypse as foretold by the prophecy. With such power available for the taking, the evil jerk did not hesitate for a second. Using the powers were easy and he quickly grew stronger, and with his powers, he killed all the people that he disliked, and snuck into a mansion. The king got bored pretty fast and realized that the rookie was just a random nobody. The commander asks if the king will mind control him since the dude has his own dagger, and the king agrees that they need to clean things up. They spill some blood, then our dude crouches beside him and steals some of his power too. The commander was surprised since our dude wanted to avoid dirty energy, but the king wanted to further look into the weird phenomena. A search party would arrive soon, so he took only a little to avoid suspicion. Suddenly, he paused when he felt something odd in the dark magic. The commander asks if he is okay as the search party draws closer, and the king admits that something feels off about this. A few days later, the king puts up a barrier around his home, and the commander asks if a soundproof barrier is necessary. The king explains that he took a closer look at the power he collected the other day, and he found out that he was the cause of the darkness of the end. The commander was confused because it did not make sense with the timeline. The dude also explained that he had no idea either, but it matches his powers perfectly, so it was definitely him. The commander is still confused, so the king reminds him that they chose regression over possession because the bodies they possessed could not handle their spiritual power. They had too much power and tried squeezing themselves into bodies that could not handle it, so they abandoned their powers and separated their souls to regress back into their original bodies. However, it turns out that he did not leave his power in the future. He left his living body and used the energy to create the Astra Schnapf, so he became something that was not quite a body nor a spirit. He believes that his necromancy powers were bound to his spirit instead of his body. His powers crossed into the past along with his soul, but his body was unable to handle it, and that must have released most of the power he had. So, his powers came with him to the past, and now that expelled energy became the darkness of the end. If that power was brought back, even if scattered, it was enough to end the world, and the commander groaned that things were hopeless when they'd come all this way to enjoy life. He suggests that the king just call the power back, and the king says he cannot make dropped coins roll back to him. The commander then cries that they are screwed because of the king, and they can no longer trust the world because the results are clear. They need to do something before another dark king rises. They decide to look into the other darknesses that could end the world. The commander groans that they are back to traveling and living like poor people. However, the king promises to make sure his commander is well fed. They head out in the morning on horses and realize that getting out does not feel so bad after all. The commander beams and says perhaps it feels better since they are not getting chased, and there are no signs of bandits either. Back in the past, they used to get harassed all the time. They clearly look like they have backing now, so bandits will not touch them, and they agree that money is great. However, they did leave under the pretense of giving magic training, so they are heading to Darth. The king agrees as that is where the last necromancer got his powers from, so there must be clues there. It feels a bit unplanned, and the darkness won't just walk itself to them. He asks if the king has any tracking magic or something. Of course, he does not, and they need to do this the old-fashioned way, just like they did back in the day. The two arrive at the Darth Adventurer Guild, and they decide that it is the best place to gather information. They have all kinds of information at hand, after all. In the past, they were able to launder their identities as adventurers, and the guild was proving to be helpful once again, although they were chased a lot as wanted criminals in the past. Things will be different this time, and there is no need for them to become adventurers either. They head inside the guild and present a bag of coins to the desk, who are happy to welcome them to the Adventurer Guild of Darth. So, they need information related to the darkness of the end. The commander says that his lord is concerned that there is darkness in his territory, and even the little details will be much help. There have been quite a bit of requests related to the darkness of the end lately, and thanks to that, they have quite a lot of information on it. They hand them a stack of books that they can look through, much to their horror because they did not expect to do so much homework. They immediately begin their research through the papers, and groan over the sheer amount of false information. There were scam incidents, a dog who ate a chicken, and for some reason they blamed the darkness for a woman running from her abusive husband. The desk clerk then offers to filter out the useless information for them, which he could have just done in the first place. However, the king would rather search through all just to make sure that he leaves no stone unturned. The commander is quite tired of it though, but the king uses magic messaging so only the commander can hear him. Sometimes, important information is hidden among countless useless-looking documents. The commander groans that this will take so much time, but suddenly a commotion happens and they turn to the sound of shouting men. A man says that there is an evil necromancer in their town and all the people laugh at him. He rushes over and says that he needs to file a report. He says a necromancer appeared in his town. The desk clerk suggests that he goes to the temple, but the temple does not believe him either, so they ask him to explain the situation. He explains that a while ago, a foreigner named Cleo appeared in their town. As soon as he arrived, he took residence in an abandoned mansion, and he started flirting around with that nice smile of his. They don't know how he has so much money at such a young age, but he frequently holds town festivals and everyone likes him. He seduced all of the young women of the town with his strange skills, and even his own fiancée left him for the new dude. So, the young, handsome, and rich man is popular in town. That does not mean that he is using a dark power. It sounds more like he is just a common rich playboy. They also say that the stranger is overthinking this. Even the clerk has to apologize that he cannot accept that report. If he insists, he will have to pay the fees to hire a personal adventurer, and his eyes nearly fall from their sockets when he sees the prices. He yells that they are frauds and that they will regret this, but all the people laugh that he is a fool who needs to keep his jealousy in check. They believe he was trying to use necromancy to get others to fight his battles, and that there are way too many people like him these days. Our guys did not get anything useful, and they heard there was a good restaurant nearby, so they decided to go over there. The clerk also promised to contact them if he heard anything new. Then, the commander pointed out that the Cleo dude sounded like a suspicious person, and the Death King agreed. They wondered why he would do that in some hillbilly town instead of in the big city when he is handsome and rich, and they guessed there was a dark reason that he picked innocent country girls. They believed that he was after virgin souls, and that it must be some kind of dark magic. They soon see the town and the commander asks the king what he thinks, so the king briefly gives him the sight. They soon see a heavy barrier around it, precisely made as well. Even a high-ranked priest would have a hard time detecting it, so the necromancer was pretty skilled. They decided to check out if he was part of the darkness of the end. But there was also the chance that he was just an ordinary necromancer. Suddenly, someone calls out to them, and it is a handsome young man who waves excitedly. They turn into surprise to see a priest coming in their direction, and wonder what he is doing out there. He is Alias, a rank 1 inquisitor of the Earth Order that serves Satoba, and they are even more shocked that he is such a high-ranked priest. They introduce themselves as the Baron Karnak of Jestard, and his family's Knight Barrows, and the priest is surprised to hear that they are not adventurers. They explain that they heard a strange rumor while they were passing by, so they stopped to take a look. So, the priest then asks if they could do him a favor, all for the sake of the goddess. The king feels a little blinded by his excitement and holy light, but they ask what he wants. He says that it is possible that there is a necromancer hiding in that town. They are shocked that the order knows, and pretend to be horrified about this news. They also ask the priest why he came alone, and he says that the order will not do anything unless there is concrete evidence, especially since there is so much false information out there these days. The king thinks things are suspicious enough to warrant an investigation. But it is a relative issue after all. It is not hard to be considered rich and handsome in a countryside town like this compared to the city. The necromancer can be called those things if they have a bit more money than others, and are not as tanned. That is why he was trying to take care of this on his own. He sees that the commander has a sword and armor that looks fairly used and a well-trained body, so he is sure that Barrows cannot be weak. They both look so skilled that he cannot help but ask them for help, as it would help him use his spells more effectively. Both our dudes think it is a royal pain, but they guess they can accompany him for now since they have to check some things out. They worry that he might find out that they also have a necromancer, so the king decides to just erase his memories if that happens, even if the commander thinks he is evil. They decide it is best to avoid that, since they are yet to see someone stay sane after going through that. So, the king says that they are also children of the goddess and that they shall help him after all. The priest is elated and says that 7 goddesses shall bless them. He first takes them to the town church, smack in the middle of enemy lines. They see the grand church looming in front of them, and the officials of the church welcome them to the Church of Wind. They meet Graz and the nun Julia, and they comment on what a great help Cleo is to the town, and he is completely unrelated to necromancy. They admit that a priest briefly stopped by, but he left after a while, so it is a shame that Alias came all the way there for nothing. The priest just smiles and says that it is a good thing that they came here for nothing, since it means that no one is in danger. The officials say that they cannot offer much, but they want the priest and his companion to be comfortable during their stay, and he guides them to their rooms. In the middle of town is a large mansion with a huge barrier over it. Inside, Cleo receives a message from the town that yet another person from the order has come to investigate. He tells the messenger to report to him as soon as something is off. The rats keep coming and he grits his teeth in frustration. The priest tells his companions to rest, while the king points out that even the entire town has positive opinions about Cleo, and maybe they have all been deceived. The priest agrees that it is pointless to interrogate people about him, so he will have to meet the necromancer to make a decision. The king is surprised that the priest will go right to his mansion, and is just going to outright interrogate him. The priest laughs and explains that there is a more effective method than that. They just need to go along with his plan. The moon shone brightly over the protected mansion that glowed blue in the dark. Footsteps brought attention to the lord of the mansion, Cleo, moving in the house. He approached a maid who asked where he was going that night. The lord simply said that he was on his way to greet an unwanted guest. He also told the maid not to worry about him, and that she should get some rest, so she said that she would see him tomorrow. He smirks that his charm works so well, and that the human mind is so weak, because he is actually an ugly old man. It took almost half a year to prepare everything to summon a demon, and it is about time for his efforts to bear fruit, and yet another hindrance appears. He is so glad that he placed the detection barrier around the house, so he will just talk to them for a bit and send them back. He opens the door and finds some robbers shamelessly raiding his house. They laugh and say that they have been caught by the rumored young master from the estate and that they heard that he has been giving money to the townspeople, so they wanted some money too. The group is totally our dudes in disguise, and the man groans to see thieves in his house. The fake robbers gasp and ask why he is laughing at them, and they say that they need to teach him a lesson. However, the Lord suddenly calls up his dark powers and calls them trash. However, the priest calls on Hatoba to bless her servants and cloaks them in golden light to block off the necromancy attack. Cleo is shocked to see a holy spell, but our dudes finally throw off their cloaks. They were glad that the necromancer revealed his identity so easily, and the priest beamed that this method always worked. Cleo growls that he was too complacent because he realizes that he has been caught. He now has no choice but to get rid of them here. He awakens his dark beasts from the underworld and tells them to bare their vicious fangs. Ghouls and zombies rise in glowing sickly green, and the priest offers to buy them some time with his authority while the king and commander charge. They fight against the attacks, the commander taking down multiple enemies with a swing of his sword, and the king shooting down enemies with his magic arrow. The enemies fall and the evil necromancer curses that it is too early, but he will use his secret technique. He calls forth a beast from the underworld, and it rises from the earth in a large burst of light and power. A beast with glowing red eyes, sharp teeth, great wings, a muscular body, and long pointed horns. It is a demon knight. The evil lord laughs that there is no way they can handle what he has just summoned. However, the priest does some summoning on his own, and once again calls on the light of Hatoba to cleanse the evil. The holy dispel shoots through the hall and hits the demon in full force. The necromancer is shocked to experience a counter summon, and the light catches all his dark creatures. He curses that he cannot disappear like this and screams in denial and disappointment. The priest already knew what kind of spell that he would try to use. Cleo says that he acknowledges them, and he sees that they are not just mere ragtags, and he no longer has any need to hide what he is. His body begins to distort and change, and his clothes start to rip as he transforms. Even his trousers rip. He screams, and the three watch as he gets bigger and bigger, and then gives a deafening roar as his shirt pops off. The priest is shocked and worried because he did not think that this would happen, and he does not have enough time to cast another counter summon. He tries to warn his companions, but they leap into action. The commander grins as he swings his sword at the necromancer, slicing him effortlessly in mad glee. The king also summons his magic arrow and pierces the monster's chest. It falls, defeated. The priest gapes as he cannot believe what just happened. The strength of the two fighters he just recruited is ordinary, but their skills and teamwork are incredible. They ask the priest if he wants them to kill the demon or let it be, but the priest says that he will take care of it. He heals up the cut man so that he will not die, and he cleanses the evil from his body. Just as expected, the man contained some darkness at the end. He began to clean up the hallway, but the king then knocked him out. It was time for them to get started too, and they snatched up all the darkness of the end mana around. It turned out this necromancer had always been a necromancer. He just happened to take the chance to absorb some of the king's powers to add to his own. It was tempting since it was a great power, but it also seemed that the dude was a cult member who revered Tesrenik, who was considered the god of death. The commander thought that his king was the god of death, since not just anybody can claim that title. Even the king admits that he is unsure. According to the gospel of the cult, Tesranik is the god of death and rebirth, and he is considered to be an entity that will purify the world through death and create a new paradise. The commander guesses that the cultists and the new god of death must be the reason for everything. They have gathered all the useful information they can get from this case, and he also gained some additional power. With the power of a priest, he can easily refine chaos mana, which is why he agreed to come with the priest so he could test out his magic. Since chaos mana was purified and sealed necromancy power, if he can use divinity, he thought that he could easily purify more chaos mana. So, the reason why he wanted to help was to try experiments with divinity, and it was interesting to watch. With this, his mana should have doubled and he should be about a 4th circle magician. The commander is impressed and says they need to be on the lookout for holy artifacts, and our dude jokes that they could steal from a church later. Then, they wake up the priest. They called out to the priest who woke with a groan, and he laughed that he let his guard down and got caught in a silly trap. He was completely convinced by their acting that they were innocent, and it looked like everything ended well. The charmed townspeople seemed a little confused, but with the help of the church, they would calm down soon. The priests asked where the two were going and they said they were going to rest in Darth City, so it was time for them to say goodbye. The priest wished them the blessings of Hatoba and they told him to be careful on his way back. However, the priest could not shake the belief that there was something suspicious about the two of them. He decided that he needed to return and learn more about them. Meanwhile, the oblivious pair head off to find some food. The priest is convinced that those two are not just nobodies and that as long as they know their identity, then they could help the castle a lot. He just needs to investigate as soon as he returns. But our dudes can only think of eating once they get back. Meanwhile, in the Darth City outskirts, someone is getting tortured and he gets lifted out of a barrel of water. The shivering man is being tortured by our dudes and he confesses to be a necromancer. He even promised to tell them everything about the power of darkness. However, the king was not satisfied, so they dunked the man again. They watched all of his bad energy flow out, saying that nothing extracted better than holy water. They even poured in some more holy water. They ended up getting tons of dark energy back and the king cheers that Hatoba is getting them the good stuff and that things are working out well. The commander offers to contact the order to clean up the mess and they celebrate catching a few necromancers. He also confessed that he was surprised when Alias asked them for help, but the king just said that's how needy the priests were for help and they probably investigated them after the Jelfa town incident. The only thing they would find is that he lost his family to necromancers. Naturally, they would think of him as the most likely person to be hunting necromancers, and they might bring them important cases for free and give them tons of holy relics, so he cannot complain. The commander suggested that it is about time that they head back home, but the king insisted not yet. The commander groaned and asked if his king was planning to collect every single scattered piece, but the king said of course not. He was just blocking the pathways through which it spread, and the power was spread through gates in time. He was investigating the conditions for those gates to appear, and that would take at least 3 more months and about 20 necromancers. The commander guessed that some massive event might happen, but they paused when an envelope floated from their door. The Hatoba order contacted them already and Alias wanted to see them. The letter said that he would explain more in person. They smelt something big brewing and headed to the grand and beautiful structure of the Hatoba temple the next day. Alias was waiting and he happily greeted them. Then he introduced them to some of his friends called Sarathi and Riltine. He also introduced his friends to them. Riltine was a 6th circle mage and was honored to meet them. Sarathi Allen was from the Adventurers Guild, and she was a swordsman. Our dude recognized Sarathi as the aura user who awakened her martial energy at the age of 20. She was quite famous these days. They also knew that Riltine was an advanced mage as well. Mages and martial energy users are sorted into levels depending on their power. The more circles a mage has, the more advanced the spells they can use. A grand mage of the 10th circle becomes a being that transcends the limits of humanity. Actually, the king himself had reached the stage of a grand mage, he just lacked mana. An aura user awakened to martial energy, in essence, had the same problem. Red, blue, purple, silver, and then gold knights. The higher a person went, the purer and stronger their aura exponentially got. Among them, becoming a gold knight was a stage only attained by the 4th martial king. Riltine was a 6th circle mage, and Sarathi was a red knight, so they sufficed as backup. Barrows never learned martial energy on his own, but he fought the 4th martial king evenly, so he doesn't think his weak spot is a huge issue. The king smiles at the new people and says that he has heard so much about them, and it is his honor to meet them both. They say there is no need to be honored, and that they were the ones who managed to catch so many necromancers in such a short amount of time, though the king acted clueless about that. Now that they were done with the greeting, Alias was ready to happily jump into his explanation since they did not have a lot of time. He told them all to sit kindly, and said that by the people he had gathered, they could tell that trouble was arising. Recently, their order was involved in a problem in Trist City, and it had been causing them problems since then. Trist City was located between the Kingdom of Eustil and the Kingdom of Tarloon, and it was a city that had long had quarrels over its land. The kingdoms grew tired of quarreling and sent one of each's nobility to be married, thus creating the Count family of Trist to rule over the now neutral land. However, the current problem is that this city is located in a place that is suitable for trade. The city lacked the authority to properly rule over the growing wealth and number of people, leading to crime syndicates taking control. This made Triss turn into a ruin thanks to the continued crime, and the largest crime syndicates, the Ranfelts and the Plaths, expanded their power. The two clans claimed the heritage of Triss's bloodline and split the city, but they had been fighting to determine the true successor. The kingdoms, which had been troubled by the management of the city, agreed to acknowledge whichever side could rule the city properly as the new count. So, the Ranfelts and Plaths fight continued on for decades, but the Plaths gained the upper hand ever since the darkness of the apocalypse took hold of the world. The Plaths were very involved in the slave trade business, and they worked with necromancers who had similar goals. Thus, they quickly began to attack the Ranfelts, but they drew too much trouble. The Ranfelts then discovered that the Plaths were using necromancers, and they reported them to the Holy Order. The Order made a move as soon as they confirmed the usage of necromancy and shut it down hard. The fight ended in the victory of the Ranfelts, and the Plaths were barely able to maintain their name. Our dude says that it sounds like the whole issue was resolved. However, there still lies a problem. See, the Ranfelts are now being accused of using necromancers, but just like the Plaths, they hid it well. The red-haired swordswoman is horrified to hear that they are both the same, and asks how the Order was not aware of this. However, the priest explained that sometimes these things were difficult to tell, even by the tracks left by the darkness of the end. She is not having it, and cannot stand that they just pretend that they had nothing to do with it, and think they are unforgivable. Meanwhile, the commander sweats as the whole story sounds a tad too familiar. However, the king has no problem with hypocrisy, and loudly declares that the Ranfelts can't even be called human anymore. He shamelessly calls them unforgivable fatherless children. The Hatoba Order's reputation is now at stake, so the hunt must be done discreetly. They agree that they must move carefully, because if they mess it up, it might cause trouble in catching necromancers in the future. They decide to disguise themselves and infiltrate the city first. They wonder why he did not just have members of the Order take care of it, and the priest confesses that he is ashamed to admit it. But they are leaking information from within the Order. The previous group they sent to the Ranfelts disappeared without a trace. They were all skilled adventurers, and they suspect it was the doing of Bishop Straff. He is a high-ranking priest who assisted the Ranfelts in driving out the Plaths. So, the priest has not informed the rest of the Order about his new plan, and he is doing this of his own accord. He has enough authority to do it, so he intends to report it after it is done. They need definite proof of necromancy being used. The swordswoman warns that it could be dangerous, and the whole city could turn against them, which is why he called them all today, and he says that he believes in all of them. He also believes that they will be able to fend for themselves in the worst-case scenario. Later, in the Ranfelt Manor, in the underground chamber, there is screaming coming from the chamber. Within, many men hang from chains and ropes, some on the floor, but most of them are injured. It has been a while since the Order sent them. A man asks if it is time for the Order to make a move again. Another replies that if that is the case, then he welcomes them. He enjoys that they send so many sacrifices his way, and he is the Bishop Straff from the Hatoba Order. The bishop is not just evil, but also a necromancer, and he uses his evil to torture the men gathered, and they scream in pain as the green magic surrounds them. His companion was worried and asked the bishop if his body could handle that amount of magic. The bishop admitted that he could not, which was why he compressed all the evil power into a ball, and revealed that he protected his body with the grace of the great goddess. He mixed together necromancy and holy power to commit his evil acts. He really hopes that they send some formidable adventurers this time, because that way he can benefit way more. Meanwhile, our oblivious group finally arrives at Triss City. They are shocked to see just how bad things are with the crumbling buildings and struggling people. With crime so rampant, it has turned into a shadow of its former self. He warns them to hold on to their belongings just as a knife comes flying at them. It hits the center of the blue-haired mage's pouch and his coins fall like rain into tiny hands. The kids run with the money as fast as they can, and the mage screeches as they make away with his money. The priest gently warns them that it is every man for themselves in this crumbling economy, and it is no wonder that the place is called the City of Sin. The mage groans and asks how they can trust staying the night in a place like this, but the priest says that he knows a place. They are shocked at where he takes them to, which is the Plath Manor, one of the only good-looking places in town. The priest's smile is almost demonic, and they are shocked that he wants them to stay at the house of the family that he brought down, and they are sure that overworking has driven him mad. The Plath family informs them that they have no intentions of making excuses and that all those who have dipped their hands in banned magic should have been punished, and that includes the Plath father. However, the new Plath family head cannot stand that the Ranfelts get away with breaking the law. The head of the Plath household, Sildar, cannot stand to let the Ranfelts get away with their evil. The priest agrees and says that they cannot just watch the Triss parish commit all these acts of violence, thus deflecting the blame and pushing it to the Trists. Our dudes noticed he was redirecting their hatred, and thought he was a scary man. Since they agree on the matter, they would like her help regarding the operation against Ranfelt, and she offers to do her best to help. The Ranfelts have reinforced their security recently, and it is impossible to approach the mansion unless they are highly ranked, which is why the priest's plan is to ambush the Ranfelt residents. Everyone gathered is shocked, and they think that it is a little too simple of a plan. However, the priest is sure that it is bound to work. The Plath head admits that the enemy does not have much of a military force in the estate, so it is doable. However, they do not have any information on the necromancers. The priest says that is fine since he has gathered veterans that know how to deal with necromancers. Later, at the Ranfelt estate, the guards patrol around the compound. Meanwhile, our group sneaks around and prepares to launch their attack. They set a bottle on fire and say that this is for the sake of revenge. They throw a bottle over the Ranfelt wall and scream that they are cowards. The guards are shocked to see bottles of fire bombs explode into their compound. They realize there is an ambush coming from outside the walls, and they shout for guards to go take care of them. They try to block as more and more bottles come rolling in, and while the bandits outside keep them distracted, the main colorful group sneaks inside the estate. They are impressed at how helpful the Plath family was, and the priest says that they must use this opportunity to get in, as he can now smell the stench of necromancy. However, they are soon stopped by a platoon of guards. The guards ask if they were sent by the Plaths, but the mage responds by summoning his magic, deciding to greet them to start the battle. He launches a fireball at them and the knights get blown away. Then, the mage launches chain lightning, and that also overwhelms a few of the knights who cannot understand how he can cast spells so fast. However, they tell each other not to panic since they are only dealing with 5 attackers. However, the swordswoman then launches in the light of the moon, her eyes shining with cold determination, and they are shocked to see a battle or a sword. They cry out, wondering what an aura user is doing there as she defeats them. She moves quickly, cutting them swiftly, her eyes shining with glee as they scream. The commander pouts about the incorrect way that she is fighting with battle aura. He thinks her movements are disappointing, and the king thinks that is rich coming from someone with no battle aura. Our dudes decide to warm up as well, and the commander attacks the soldiers, launching at him with a single swipe of his sword. The king agrees to get ready and shoots down some attackers as well. Many knights fall to their attacks, and soon the group makes quick work of their enemies. The priest is also getting some licks in, swinging a sword and yelling at the enemies to surrender. They wonder where a priest even learned to wield a sword like that. Their group priest is so chaotic. They notice the enemy falling back, but they wonder why the necromancers are not coming out to fight them. They assume they must be waiting inside the building since that would be more to their advantage. The group has no choice but to take the bait and go inside. They realize that it is quiet, then someone shows up to congratulate them for making it all the way there. The person recognizes the aura user and the high-ranked mage because they must be very famous. However, the enemy says that is all pointless in the face of the power of the dark. A high-ranked undead specter appears, and the necromancers laugh wickedly. They were so excited to have found the evidence immediately, and now all they had to do was capture them. Those 3 necromancers were going to be good money, and the whole chaotic group was excited. The necromancers were annoyed that they were being taken for fools and launched attacks at the group, and ordered the evil specter to absorb their life essence. The priest activated his holy light to punish all that was impure, and the specter struggled for a moment. For some reason, the necromancers did not realize that they came with a priest. But the swordswoman takes advantage of their confusion and fear and launches an attack on the specter. Then, she races ahead towards the 3 necromancers and launches an attack on them, when suddenly their faces explode. The priest yells to remind her that they have to capture, not kill the necromancers, but she explains that the attack was not her. Just then, the mansion starts to transform, and the group watches in horror as the inside of the mansion beats and pulses like it is alive. They are shocked that they changed the space, and did not even believe that it was possible, when someone suddenly laughs and says that he got a nice harvest. It is of course the creepy sadist bishop, and he is thrilled to have gotten an aura user and a 6th circle mage. He even got Inquisitor Alias, and the priest recognized the voice of the person he suspected from the beginning, the bishop, Straff. He grinned, knowing that Alias came because he suspected him. The priest admitted that he did not want to believe that a servant of the goddess would be tempted by the power of the dark. The exits are now blocked, and they cannot destroy the walls. The priest explains that it is because their powers are weakened by the dark, so he will try to eliminate the death energy. However, he realizes something is wrong, and that his divinity is not working. The king watches in surprise to see that the divine power is being eaten by the necromancy power. The bishop laughs and says that the people they came across were not the real necromancers, and that if necromancy was so small, then the 7 orders would not be so wary of the power of the dark. He asks how the priest feels to meet a real necromancer, and the priest grits his teeth. Meanwhile, the king warns his commander to get ready, because if they are unlucky, this might end up in their grave. The barrier that had been made was mixed with divine power and necromancy, and he had never seen a barrier like that before. There is nothing he can do against it, and he would have to use only chaos mana and necromancy power. The commander is surprised that a hillbilly town priest can pull off something his boss had never done. But the king was never too old to learn something new. There was nowhere to run, and something was coming. The priest stared in shock as he saw a necromancy puppet, the chaotic golem. The golem marched towards them, its heavy steps echoing through the chamber. The priest called up his power and put up a protective barrier around them. However, the golem smashed the barrier, and the priest strained to keep it up. The mage told him to hold on a little longer while he summoned his power. He unleashed violent flames that burnt through all at the golem, but the golem just punched through that too. Both the priest and the mage fell over to see two other golems waiting. The golems captured the priest and the mage, and they were to lock them in the basement with the other offerings. The swordswoman refused to let this slide and attacked. However, her sword slash did nothing, much to her horror. She was captured and the remaining two, who were our dudes, were deemed useless and irrelevant. They were not very pleased to hear that. The swordswoman was thought to have such a desirable soul. However, the commander swung and cut through the hand of the golem, saving the redhead. He reminded her that he told her to be careful, and he sliced the mighty beast with his sword. The redhead watched him in awe as the commander landed. She asked how he did that without aura, and he stuttered on how to reply. The weak points of chaotic golems were the spots where mana did not flow, so the issue was that the flow kept shifting and making it tough to pinpoint the weak spots. However, he already had plenty of experience doing that. He had to leave her on her own because if he ran out of stamina, he would also be finished. He wondered why the young master was not stepping in to help. Meanwhile, the king was thinking that their current situation was very bad. Necromancy was not working on the barrier either, and even if he tried to imbue the fog with his own necromancy power, he still would be unable to control it. At this rate, they were going to lose and they were in desperate need for another solution. He fought off the golems, pondering about how there were necromancy spells that he did not know about. He was sure that something else was involved in this, and he has only one idea what it could be. So, he will test his theory. The commander valiantly fights against the golems, though he deems them annoying, and the king fights too. The bishop becomes frustrated, and wonders how they are destroying so many chaotic golems so easily. He blames himself for underestimating them, and thinks that he should have absorbed the necromancy scroll sealed in the Hatoba order as well. The golems were not enough, so he had to do something else. That was when a mad blue spirit jumped out at them. The king put up a barrier and gestured for the swordswoman to run to them. She hurried over and they were surprised that she was slower than they expected. She fought valiantly and tried to cut down the happy evil spirit. To her shock, slicing it did not have the desired effect, and she pulled her hands away with a scream as if she was burned. She was finally captured and knocked unconscious, and the king decided that enough was enough. He called the bishop an amateur necromancer, and he finally smirked triumphantly as he figured out what was going on. The barrier was collapsing, much to the enemy's shock, and he asked our dude what he had done. Our dude smirks and said that he just placed his own barrier on top of the bishop's already existing barrier. He was annoyed that the bishop acted so high and mighty when he was just an amateur. The bishop did not take kindly to being called an amateur and awoke the undead of the underworld. The commander was surprised that the bishop could summon the undead, but the king just says that he cannot do much against basic necromancy, so they needed to handle them and get ready to fight. They all looked like high-ranked undead as well, and Barrows did not at all think that was basic necromancy. Their enemy has way more necromancy power than they thought, and they would end up fighting forever at this rate. The longer they fought, the worse it got for them, so they agreed to make a break for it as soon as they got the chance. He used Dark Blade to slash the zombies away, and most of them fall back, falling left and right. The bishop laughs that their attack is not bad, but it is useless against his overwhelming power. He called forth the demon of Gehenna, and a monstrous rumbling filled the space. From the symbol on the ground, a large beast arose. It breathed out smoke and furnace, with its whole body covered in red and giant horns on its head. It asked its contractor to state his desires, and the bishop commanded that he kill the men and bring the woman. The demon hummed deeply, but then asked again who exactly he was supposed to kill. See, there was an issue as he could not see the two men before him. The two laughed that they had never seen a necromancer fall for an illusion so easily, and the bishop asked what illusion they were referring to. The king then laughs that the bishop's barrier already broke and that he really was an amateur. Then, they wished him kudos and disappeared before his very eyes. The bishop raged when he realized that he had been deceived by an illusion. He yelled at the sky and called them horrid jerks. Meanwhile, our dudes clicked their tongues, and the king called the bishop an idiot for only focusing on one type of spell. Thanks to that, they had enough time to escape. It would be too dangerous for them to return to the Platz, and the Ranfelts would search there first. Meanwhile, the redhead they saved confronts them for lying all along. They greeted her now that she was awake and asked how she was feeling, like she would be happy they left half of their companions back there. She told them not to pretend to care when they are filthy necromancers and asks where they are. The king reveals that they are hiding outside the city to avoid the barriers and they needed time to heal her. She is surprised that they have no bigotry or interest in killing her. They explain that they are good people and that they will just erase some of her memories, countering their words with their evil actions. However, she says it is fine since she cannot feel her hands and likely will no longer live a normal life, let alone be a swordsman. With her face twisted in pain, she asks them to just kill her. The commander was shocked at her request for them to just kill her, though the poor swordswoman was really going through it. However, the commander suggested that they try using a healing spell from a skilled priest. The king points out that they cannot use holy magic since that would go against the natural order. So, the commander asks if there is anything they can do to help her with necromancy. The king does not want to casually mention that. However, the lady instantly perks up when she hears that she might be able to get her arm back. He says that he might be able to do that, but he does not recommend it since she will have to become his servant. He reminds her that there is no way she would leap at the chance to become the servant of an evil necromancer that she was discriminating against 5 seconds ago. For a moment, she battles with her beliefs and her need to fight. She knows that a necromancer can control the human soul in order to use them like slaves through a slave contract. There have been plenty of stories of captured adventurers going through cruel torture until they met their end. It was terrible just thinking about it. However, she very dearly wanted to use her hands again. The king asked the commander if he mentioned necromancy on purpose, and the commander just laughed that he had no other choice since he knew exactly what she was feeling, and he hoped he was not asking too much. The king called to her and explained that he was trying to stay away from using necromancy, but seeing her in her current state, he could not really give her a suggestion as to what she should do. If she becomes his servant, she will regain her lost arm. She can decide and he will do whatever she says. She then asked what would happen if she became his servant, and he explained that the contract would be sealed and he would see the structure of her soul. With that information, he would restore her body. After that, although she will have free will, a few restrictions will be placed, and if she betrays him, she will die. It sounded dangerous, but it did not seem too different from the vow of loyalty that knights underwent. She could either lose her freedom or her future as a swordsman. The decision was hers. After much thought, she made up her mind and asked our dude to kindly accept her as his servant. He decided to ask one more time, just to be sure, and asked if she was sure about her decision, and she assured him that it was better than never holding a sword again. So, it was time for them to begin. In the name of Karnak Jestard, Lord of Darkness, he asked Sarathi Allen to become his servant. She knelt before him and accepted her role, as he told her to open her mind and accept the contract of servitude. As she did so, she would regain what she had lost, and a bright light traveled through her body into her arm. She felt her arm thrum with dark power and groaned in pain. However, suddenly, she lifted her hands and realized that she could feel them once more. As the power dispelled, he called her name and told her that she was not his servant. Beaming with joy at regaining her hands, she happily responded and called him master. The commander was very happy for her, and now they asked what to do about the kidnapped alias in Roltine. The bishop's draft's necromancy power was stronger than they thought, so it would be best to use large-scale necromancy against him, instead of chaos mana. However, the commander reminded him that if he did that the city would get destroyed. So, the king had 2 options. First, they could get ready and go save Alias and Roltine, or they could give up on them and run away. Either choice was going to make them a bad guy, and our dude sighed that being good was harder than they expected. However, their new swordswoman said that saving their friends was the only obvious choice. The commander was surprised and asked if that was acceptable, even if they used a violent method. She agreed that it was not the best choice, but they could not just give up on their friends. She was sure that saving their friends, even despite the potential danger, was the right thing to do. The commander then nodded, learning that good intent would always justify evil methods. That was not exactly what she was trying to teach them, but she went along with it. Gleeful that he now has no choice but to use necromancy, the king is now excited to save their friends. Even the commander is pumped since Sarathi told them it was justified. And she yells that was not what she said. Meanwhile, raids are going round the cities and people are banging on doors. There is a search for a suspicious outsider, and people get dragged out of their homes to be searched. One person insists that they are just harmless merchants, but the guard tells him to shut up as they have been ordered to capture all outsiders. Many visitors are dragged out of their rooms, and some of the guards think it is such a bother to do this so late at night. Someone catches one of the guards drinking, and yells at him to stop standing there and to move it. The guard complains about being ordered around, and the man pulls out his sword, though his hand is trembling, saying that he's not doing any of this because he wants to. Suddenly, his arm swings with a sword in his grip and he lashes out at the other man. The other man pulls out his sword and yells that the other guy wants a fight. However, the other dude insists that his sword move on its own. It happens again, and this time, the drunk is the one that attacks. The other raiders yell at the two to stop fighting and to get to work. However, the drunk morphs demonically and yells that the other guy started the fight. The other raiders rush to kill the monster that has appeared in their midst, and the dude is surprised to see the others rushing to attack him. He asks what monster they are talking about, but he gets cut down before he can ask any further questions. The city is so corrupt that everyone falls into a panic as soon as an issue arises, and he got to save his necromancy powers as well, so this was also easy. The swordswoman asked why he had to cause such a scene, and our dude explained that he was making an army of the undead. She was horrified at what he was doing, but he said it was the best choice to face against Straff, and fortunately there was enough death energy to use in the city. However, there were not enough bodies to control, so he is now making more. He says he had no choice but to make more if there's not enough. However, a little evil to save their friends is okay because that is what she said, and they laugh evilly. She wonders if it is okay that they have twisted her words for their own evil benefits, but if she had said nothing, they would have left their friends behind. Besides, he did not seem as evil as rumors say all necromancers are, since he was only targeting members of Ranfeld and leaving the ordinary townspeople alone. The men continued to fight, shouting that they knew their comrades would betray them, so the rot already went deep. They were finally going to use the chance to kill all the comrades they thought hated them. Some of the Ranfelt men were confused about what was going on, as many more men fell to the sword. Things were working out quite well for our dude, though our new girl was rather concerned. The king had finally gathered enough bodies to make things even, and he told his demon army to awaken. The fallen bodies were covered with purple light, and the zombies began to rise, all ugly with sharp teeth and glowing eyes. They picked their swords and began their march, and the redhead watched in horror, deciding that our dude was definitely cruel and evil after all. The army of the undead began their march back to the Ranfelt headquarters, and he smiled as he told them to march forward. The swordswoman was really worried about her future, and if she would be okay becoming the servant of someone like this. Even dark-winged pink creatures rose and they flew overhead in the sky, some of them hopping from branch to branch. The zombies and the winged beasts marched on, and although everything was going according to plan, Straff's necromancy power was still stronger than he thought, and the bishop managed to summon a death dragon and 7 trumpeters. The king pouted about how he was supposed to be the only one who could use that spell. However, since the past change, people managed to obtain some of his items. He said it was time for them to go or they'd be discovered. And the swordsman was confused. So, the king had to explain that the zombies were all an illusion, which shocked her very much. Most of them were illusions since there was no way he could raise an army that large in such a short period of time. She was so relieved because she had been worried that only evil flowed through his veins, and she was happy to hurry and help. Meanwhile, the villainous bishop continued to do his wicked red necromancy while tying down the priest and the mage. He laughed that zombies were nothing more than pests despite their numbers, and that he would find those who escaped and tear them down. He searched for them, but was shocked to hear their voices behind him as they commented that his basement was pretty big. The bishop turned in shock, and our dude posed with his knights and said that he'd told the bishop that they would see soon. Meanwhile, the bishop was confused about how they got there. Both the lady swordsman and the commander charged in a flash of light and blew at the bishop's zombie goons. The king then uses the opportunity to call forth the slaves of the soul, calling them from the depths of purgatory. The echoes of the underworld rose up and answered in flashing colors of green, with white skeletal faces. They also lashed out and aided the commander and swordswoman as they fought side by side. They valiantly cut down a nice number of the bishop's zombies. Any zombies that they missed were cut down by the swordswoman and the commander. Most of the zombies fell to the floor in defeat as they were cut down, with their weapons strewn around them. The bishop could not believe how quickly his forces were dealt with. He decided to use his trump card and then called forth the Gehenna demon. The mighty red-skinned beast once again arose from the depths of the underworld. The swordswoman was shocked to see a demon, but the commander was quite tired of the bishop always summoning Magna. The king laughed at him summoning the same guy as last time, saying that it was too repetitive. He was sure that the bishop's necromancy power had now reached its limit, and he used his own power to bind the great demon who groaned as he struggled against it. He growled out in question of the mighty power that surrounded him, and the king laughed that it was a counter-summoning, and he was sending the demon back where it came from. The demon declared that he could just rip it to shreds, and that something like this was not strong enough to hold him down. A huge red explosion temporarily blinded out heroes, and the demon grinned in triumph as he was now free from the ropes. He then demanded that the contractor give him an order, and the bishop gleefully asked again that he kill the man and bring him the woman. The demon leapt at the chance to fulfill the contract, and suddenly unleashed an incredible amount of pressure that intimidated the swordswoman. The king was confused that the summoning gate stopped closing, and it did not go as planned, so he asked the redhead and the commander to keep fighting while he figured things out. They groaned but jumped back into the fray, fighting against the big red demon. They put up a very good fight and launched a few attacks at it. However, it laughed and called them insects, swinging its mighty sword. They managed to dodge the attack, leaping back but groaning as some of the power affected them. The king then tried a new form of fiery-looking magic, and threw a few fireballs at the demon. It caught the fireballs easily. The redhead was partly impressed and said that if the demon was an aura user, it would be almost around the level of a purple knight. The commander also wished he had awakened his battle aura so that he would not be struggling like this. Suddenly, the king came up with a new plan that he thought they could go with. The commander also realizes the plan that his king is referring to. The king places his hand on his commander's head and calls him his kin. The redhead is surprised to see this, since the king denied being kin with Lord Barrows. The king calls out for Barrows to open his mind and accept his master's orders, and the commander opens glowing blue eyes, as well as the swordswoman. Plan P was possession, and the commander was thrilled to be in someone else's body. He was now in the body of the swordswoman, and she was shocked that she was the kin being mentioned. The king then called them Sarah Barrows, which the redhead thought was a very stupid name. The commander apologized to her, but he would borrow her body for a bit, and he launched at their enemy. She cried that he should treat her well and ensure to give her back. The red demon laughed and asked how someone who was not an aura user would successfully use another person's battle aura. However, Barrows laughed and asked who said he could not use aura. He slashed at the surprised and confused demon that coughed in pain, and Barrows laughed that using someone else's aura was his expertise. The demon realized that the commander aimed perfectly for his gap, and that he was stronger than before, so this was difficult. Suddenly, the blue aura activated and the commander was intrigued. The redhead was surprised that she became a blue knight because he was using her body, while he thought that her latent power was incredible. Thanks to that, he was able to fight a bit more comfortably, and he slashed at the demon, moving even faster than before. The great beast took many hits and coughed out in pain, much to Barrow's delight. The demon coughed out, thinking there was no way that he would be losing. However, Barrows evilly and gleefully launched at him, and the demon cursed, swinging his sword to block the attack. The commander dodged and slid to a stop, goading the demon by asking if that was all he got. The demon had the audacity to call the commander a monster while he panted, and growled that the commander had not won just because of a few cheap shots. He growled that once the commander stopped possessing that body, it would all be over, and launched a huge red blast right at him. There was a huge purple flash, and debris fell all over the place. The demon laughed maniacally with glee, and called Barrows careless. However, the king laughed and said that the one who summoned, and the one who was summoned, got fooled easily. The demon was shocked to see so many illusions surrounding him, and the king laughed that he knew what the demon was thinking. The demon then realized that he was completely surrounded by illusions, and he had no idea which one he had to kill. However, Barrows launched from behind and attacked him in the redhead's body, slashing him thoroughly. The demon coughed out its life essence, and groaned that he overexerted himself to get out of the counter summon, so now he does not have enough mana. He groaned that a mere human was able to do so much damage to him, and the summoning gate opened underneath him, which worried Barrows. The demon pointed angrily at them and said that he was leaving now, but once he got back, he would find them first. Then, he will make sure that they cannot die or lie, and that is a promise from hell. The king growled that the demon was trying to run after everything they had done, and he refused to let him get away with it. The demon decided to escape, but our dude was not having it, and he shouted that he would not let the big guy get away with it. He was going to have the big red demon become extinct on this battleground, and wrapped it in dark purple necromancy magic. It screamed as all of its mana got zapped and started flowing backwards. He screamed in denial and rage, but he got struck with the ultimate power and evaporated, fading away to nothing. The illusions also disappeared, and the commander and Redhead returned to their rightful bodies. The commander thanked the mist for letting him borrow her body, and the king grinned that there was now only one jerk to deal with, though the Redhead was exhausted now. The bishop then laughed and surrendered. He offered to tell them all the information they wanted to know, and asked what they wanted to know. However, the king says that the bishop is misunderstanding something. It was simpler for them to kill the evil rat rather than interrogate him. Then, they could make his soul confess all his secrets, and that would make everything less complicated. However, he added that Sarathi was the reason that he could not kill the bishop, but the swordswoman immediately called for his death without remorse. That was perfect for our bloodthirsty guy who was happy to jump at the chance, and he activated his necromancy. The bishop gasped in fear and started to beg for them to wait as he attempted to flee. However, he was cut down by the necromancy, and he screamed in agony. Once he was dead, it was time for business, and he extracted the darkness from him, which was about 30 servings. Very generous of him. Soon, they would be able to go home, and now that they had gathered enough, it was time to return. The commander even gleefully talked about looking into some good restaurants. They are so distracted that the swordswoman has to remind them that they came to rescue their friends. They totally forgot about them, but they helped save them, and they were shocked when they woke up. They could not believe that the three defeated the evil Straff all by themselves, when he was so powerful. The king just said that they were lucky, and that a while after they were injured by the golems and dragged away, a sudden army of zombies hit the residence. It seemed some other necromancer used the commotion to rise and revolt, and it makes sense when one thinks about Straff's character. They agreed that he must have run low on necromancy power, so he ran to the basement. They did not miss out on the opportunity and got Saratha's help to defeat him. That was all that supposedly happened while they were unconscious. The priest had nothing else to say other than Hatoba must have blessed them with luck, and the king says that they did not touch the corpse, so the priest could carry out his purification ritual. The priest does just that, and he is amazed at the incredible amount of darkness they got. Compared to other necromancers, the priest had at least 10 times the amount of darkness of the end. The commander then asked, confused, why there was necromancy power left when the king could have taken it all. However, the king reminds him that they cannot be too obvious. Now that everything was done, and they had defeated Straff, the Ranfelts had now lost their primary force and the city would soon stabilize. They could leave the rest of the work to the order, and it was time to head back. However, to the priest's shock, he heard that the swordswoman had suddenly become a knight of the Gestured Barony. The priest asked why she would take such a decision, and she lied that she realized that the Baron Karnak was someone worth pledging her alliance to. Through her eyes did not match her words. The priest celebrated with her since she had found someone to serve, and the king said that he would return to his territory to officially ordain her. So, this was goodbye, and he thanked the team for their cooperation. When the opportunity arose, they would meet again. They did in fact return to the Gestured estate without any issue, and the servants joyfully welcomed back their young lord. The king was happy to see them all again, and they came out to greet the young lord, asking if he was well after all this time. However, they paused in shock when they saw that he had returned with a woman. They all asked with joy and wonder of the identity of the beautiful woman that he had returned with. They were so excited and thought that their young lord had returned with what they likely thought was his girlfriend. The lord introduced her as Sarathi Allen, the new knight of the Gestured Barony, and she said that it was nice to meet him. They were surprised that she was just a knight, and they said that he could not just take any person in as a knight. However, the commander just asked her to show them her skills. She drew her sword and revealed the strong red aura that surrounded it, much to the servants' shock to see a lady swordsman wielding battle aura. One mighty swipe of her sword changed their minds, and it sliced a tree in two even from a great distance. The people watched in awe as the tree collapsed, and they gaped at meeting an aura user. She just smiled and said that she looked forward to getting to know them all, and they wondered what a precious person was doing in a shabby place like this. A few weeks later, training had begun and members of the guards had already started training with the new Knight Sarathi. The other knights watched the dude struggle and felt for him because they had all been there. Even with their weight difference, just using her strength was enough to push him back, and she was not even using her battle aura. They thought that aura users were indeed very incredible. She successfully knocked the dude's sword away and it went flying. He panted as they both watched his weapon hit the ground, and he sighed that she was as strong as he expected. It was time to end the training for the day, and she told him that he had done great work. Then, Barrows showed up to thank her for helping the knights train. Then, he eagerly asked if he could go next, with his weapon hefted on his shoulder. She obliged and they clashed swords in training, her sparking with color and aura. As they fought, he mumbled that her use of her own aura was still awkward, and that she wasted too much of her power when she fought. He also remarked that she needed to be able to use the right amount of power in each strike. She groaned that it was easier for him to say than to actually do. Even with her aura, she was struggling against his centuries of discipline and combat. She groaned and then asked why he did not just possess her body like before. She was sure that if she experienced his power a few more times then she would get a feel for what she was supposed to do. He thought about it, and then said that it was best not to do that more than once, since doing that 3 times would corrupt her soul and make her go crazy. She was horrified and shocked by this news. However, he told her that she could get stronger even without possession since she was talented enough. She could not believe they had done something that dangerous to her. Then, he added that she needed to help him awaken his battle aura in the afternoon, so they could end their spar. Meanwhile, our king sighed heavily and thought deeply. He admitted that there was no way of knowing how Straff was able to combine necromancy with divinity. He had thought about it long and hard and wondered if there was an ability to combine his power with another energy. He felt that he would have definitely learned of it since he lived so long. However, he has no clue and he groans in frustration. He decided then that he would think more about that later, and he would block the hole that was spreading in the darkness for a moment. He understood that the darkness of the end could flow somehow, and get through time and space to spread throughout this land. So, he just needed to make a powerful physique that could investigate dangerous time and space. He was going to wash the darkness down several strands, and manipulate it in detail without making any mistakes. He summoned the darkness and it swirled in red circles around him as he worked his power over it. Time-space investigation powerful physique. He had finally completed the Eye of Darkness. The king could not believe that Barrows still had not awoken his battle aura yet, when he was supposed to be the world's greatest martial artist. The group had moved within the forest in the Deventer territory, next to the Jestard territory. The commander sulked that he was the strongest before he regressed, and he missed when the king was the Death King because it made things easier. Back then, the king could give him some of the dark battle aura to fight with. The king glared that it was not as if he could go back and get his lost power. Meanwhile, the swordswoman worried about the conversation she was hearing. She had just realized that these 2 idiots were the cause of all the darkness in the world now. She had heard about everything on the way about their world domination and space-time regression. She guessed that it made sense since she already thought they were more than ordinary knights and nobles. However, to think that they were transcendents that took over the world, and then regressed, she wondered how she ever got involved with those people. The people in question happily munched on some food with glee, and she sighed. She knew they were trying to raise the Eye of Darkness, but she was unsure why they were in the Deventer territory. He confessed that it would be a hassle if they were caught using necromancy in their own territory. When he thought about what the Deventers did to their family, this was just a mere prank. However, the Deventer fighter's spirit would never forgive our dude. The moon was hidden behind a few clouds and our dude decided that it was time to act. He summoned the Eye of Darkness, and she asked what he was going to do with it. He replied that he would send it through time-space to see if there was a way to close the door of darkness. He sent it off and it flew with great enthusiasm. They watched it fade away into the night for a moment. Then she wondered why things were so quiet, and the king explained that they did not open time-space, they were just looking inside it. It was not like a kite could cause hurricanes. He would use the eye to enter the infinity realm while unconscious and told them to protect him while he was out. They agreed, and so he closed his eyes and connected with the eye. His consciousness traveled down the red line that the eye had disappeared to. It seemed like his technique was working and the eye breached a path between time and space. He looked around with his eye and saw something that looked like a tree growing from the darkness. He flew in a little closer and gasped as he had finally found the source of his problems. It was a giant tree with a twisted trunk that looked deformed and evil. It was the Tree of Emptiness, Astra Naf. It was the true form of the authority that he used to wield, and he knew he shouldn't be the one to say it, but it was pretty ugly. Suddenly, the tree dropped a fruit and it fell from the tree and into the waters, passing through the space and time portal, and our dude realized that this was how the darkness of the end was spreading. If he could stop this, then he could stop the darkness. He started his search for the core of the authority, and soon found the large purple and black mass at the center of the tree. He figured that he might be able to get some information out of it. However, to his surprise, the tree told him to stay back. Our dude was shocked and offended. The disembodied voice called him mortal, and it said that this place was forbidden for those who were destined to disappear. Our dude called out and asked who was speaking to him. The reply was that the speaker was death and darkness, and the waters surrounding the tree began to swirl. The speaker went on that it was destined to destroy, and it exploded with dark energy that surprised our king. He wondered what the heck was going on, shocked at the huge power that made up the darkness of the end. He could not believe that this new creature was able to control his power with ease. The creature said that it worked in the name of Tessernik, and our dude was stunned. He had heard that name before, but he had no time to ponder. The attacking evil voice told him to return and called him a pitiful mortal, blasting him with a wave of darkness. Our dude groaned and could not support the eye anymore. He cried out as he fell and groaned. Meanwhile, Barrows called out to him with worry, and our dude groaned as he returned to his body. His commander asked if he was okay, and our dude rubbed his head. He asked what happened, and the commander reported that his body started floating and then he passed out. The commander asked if something went wrong, and the king said that they could talk about that later. Then, he asked the name of the god that those cultists believed in, the supposed death god. The swordswoman had heard of him, and he was called Tessernik, the dark god of death and darkness that the Order of the Black God served. Our dude laughed and said that he'd found said god when he went snooping around. Much to the commander's shock, he could not believe that the cultist god was real, and the king admitted that it could not be. He could not understand why something like that could possibly exist, or why it could control his powers. Meanwhile, 3 golden lights illuminated 3 golden people. They had veils on their faces and they discussed a problem within the sanctuary. They were the Order of the Black God, and the first speaker was the Pope of Death. The next speaker asked what the problem could be, since the sanctuary was supposed to be a place that nothing could approach. He was the Dark Lord of the Order of the Black God. The last female-looking character admitted that the situation was odd, and she was the Priestess of Destruction. The priestess admitted that she needed to first confirm the problem herself. She rang a bell to investigate the said issue in the sanctuary, and a maid rushed in, asking if her Lord Eleazar called for her. The priestess smiled like an angel and asked for Hudel to be brought to her, because she was looking for him. She was Eleazar de Replassion, the imperial mage of the Lenarcia Empire, one of the 3 archmages and the Priestess of Destruction. With the moon high in the sky, they discussed how he was unable to find a way to stop the opening. After that, he tried to approach it multiple times but to no avail. If this continues, they will eventually be found, so he had to stop since that was dangerous. All that he could figure out was that the Order of the Black God believed in the Tessernik, and the issue was the kind of stance they were taking. The commander asked if they were people taking advantage of the power that fell from the tree, or if they were people disturbing the tree to obtain power at random. If it was the latter, it would become a huge issue. And the swordswoman asked what was the difference. The king explained that disturbing the tree meant that they were able to influence powers beyond time and space, which meant that they could grow the realm, and that difficult task took him years to accomplish. It took ages to make a time regression spell. So, he was saying that if the Order of the Black God was disturbing the tree, then they had absolute power that went beyond his powers as the Death King. Both Barrows and Sarathi were horrified to hear this. If they had that kind of power, then there was no need for them to do anything unnecessary. That was also why they were able to contain that Tessernik being in the void. The commander groaned and asked where the heck that jerk came from, and our king was frustrated with not knowing too. Then, the swordswoman asked what if part of his power gained consciousness and became the Tessernik being. The commander thought that made no sense and that power could not be conscious. However, it made sense to the Death King, which surprised the commander. He groaned that nothing about this situation made sense, and it blew his mind that the tree named itself Tessernik and was now acting like a god, which meant our dude was now capable of making gods. And he needed to control his kids. The king protested that it was just an idea. They still did not know the truth, and it was frustrating. They all sighed heavily and agreed that they needed to look into the Order of the Black God first. The lower members would not help them, so they needed to investigate the higher officials. It would be difficult to find those cultists using their current methods, so the king thought about it for a moment. He said that they would have to enter the King's Order, which was a special imperial organization created to hunt members of the Order of the Black God. After the Age of Chaos, under the orders of the 7 goddesses, inquisitors and darkness hunters have killed necromancers. Despite this, the appearance of the Order of the Black God throughout the continent started to cause issues, especially since plenty of members were high nobles or royalty that joined the Order of the Black God. It was difficult for the 7 goddess order to handle everything on their own, which was why the 7 nations got together and developed a special division, which was called the King's Order. Members of the King's Order were given the right as censors, allowing them to investigate and arrest those who were suspected to be cultists, with rare cases allowing them to execute individuals. Due to that, the selection conditions are strict and one is only able to join through referrals. That was the huge issue, and they had no idea how they were supposed to have connections to an imperial organization. Barrows said that he was known as a darkness hunter for a good period of time, and perhaps he should have worked a bit more near the capital. The swordswoman was surprised that being a part of the King's Order was their plan, because she could easily get them the opportunity to apply. They were absolutely shocked at her words, and Barrows marveled at her amazing connections. The king happily ate his meal and said that they would need to pack their bags right away. The afternoon sun was high in the sky and there was a lot of commotion at the manor. The head butler cried as he found a letter from his young lord which said that he had to leave for a bit, and that he would bring back fame and honor to the family. The butler cried that he had run off again without telling them. Meanwhile, in Darth City, our three are gathered at a restaurant table outside, and Barrows asked if it was okay to leave after leaving a note and sneaking out in the middle of the night. The king groaned that the old man would have stopped them. Since he was a lord, he was not supposed to leave for long periods. Suddenly, someone approached them and apologized for being late. Sarathi was happy to see the newcomer and the king beamed with joy to see their referral had arrived. They beamed with joy and asked their referral if he was doing well, and thanked him for coming even though they contacted him at the last minute. Their referral was Alias and the beaming priest was happy to hear from them. Last night, the two were surprised to hear that she asked Alias for a recommendation. They had heard that the King's Order and the Seven Goddesses Order were separate organizations. However, she said they were not completely unrelated. They needed a cleric to catch a necromancer, and since the King's Order needed support from a cleric from the Seven Goddess Order, when they accepted members, there was a condition that they need to receive a recommendation or be vetted by the Seven Goddess Order. A first-rank inquisitor like Alias obviously had the authority to give such a recommendation. The king asked how the swordswoman knew this, as they snuck away in the dead of the night. She revealed that she heard it all from the priest himself. He had called them to the Ranfelt family incident with the plan of giving them a recommendation in the first place. He laughed that it was such a shame when they said they were going to return to their territory, as he was about to recommend the three of them for the king's order. He was so happy that they returned like this, and the king also laughed that they almost missed a good opportunity. He handed them the recommendation letter and said that they could take it to headquarters, although this would not guarantee their joining. However, he was sure they'd be able to get in and wished Hatoba's blessings on them. They thanked him with a smile and headed off. They were soon at a beautiful capital city of Drunta, Eustal Kingdom's capital. Inside was the King's Order headquarters. There were various knights of the King's Order stationed within and everyone standing looked rather built and talented. The king admitted that the people gathered looked better than he expected, and the swordswoman already identified two aura users. The capital was built different. Someone approached them then and said that they must have waited long. They had confirmed the recommendation that they brought, and they would guide them to the Order Lord. They were taken to a different room where the Order Lord waited. He welcomed them and introduced himself as the commander of the King's Order, Erantel. He was the King's Order commander and the Purple Knight, Erantel von Naed. They said that it was nice to meet him, and he confirmed the recommendation letter they brought. They all were qualified and their identities were secure. Above all, it was a recommendation from Inquisitor Alias, so they were considered rather trustworthy. However, he told them that it was not enough to enter the King's Order. The Death King admitted that he had heard that there was a training period for new members, and it was in order to prevent pagans from infiltrating. He would now give them their first task, and Barrows tensed a bit. They were surprised to get a task so soon after joining, but he laughed that this is what their line of work was like. There was always work and they were always busy. He laughed and welcomed them to the King's Order, and they hoped they would not be worked like dogs while they were there. They were asked to say hello to some of the other knights. Tarman was introduced, and was the 4th Battalion's general. He would be guiding them throughout their practical placement duration. He was also the Alban Viscounty's second son, and a 5th Circle Mage. Then Kald, Adelam's dual-blade swordsman, and Alice, a rank 2 Inquisitor from the Ocean Goddess Artema, introduced themselves. The king said that it was nice to meet them and acknowledged how busy it was at work. Tarman just said that they had bad timing because they showed up on a day where they got a mission. The commander admitted that he did not expect the general to be a mage, and the big guy asked if it was strange for a 5th Circle Mage to have aura users as his subordinates. Barrows quickly backtracked, saying that he did not think that their general was weak. But the general just explained that in their line of work, identity was also a part of ability. He had to deal with secular powers, so in this world, the power of the family was more important than ability. As they worked, they would learn, but the main job of the King's Order was to collect information and track down pagans. They also had to abduct key figures and conduct interrogations, not fighting. Just because they were strong at fighting did not mean they would be good at this line of work. The swordswoman then asked why it sounded like only wicked missions were available, and Tarman laughed, saying that their job was to do wicked things to pagans. That was why mages that could use diverse methods were more advantageous in this line of work. Most of the generals of the King's Order were mages, and the swordswoman asked if this meant that clerics could also qualify as generals. However, the priestess reminded her that the King's Order was made to also keep the 7 goddesses' order in check. So, a priest could not be given a general position. That made sense to everyone, and it was now time to explain the mission. They received the information that a regional noble had joined the Order of the Black God. The suspect was Count Brelant, at the south of Eustal Kingdom. They would disguise themselves as adventurers, and go to the Brelant County and get proper evidence before punishing the Count with the king's name. The general apologized that this was all of the info that they had, and our dude was baffled. He was shocked that they had to go even though they did not know if he was actually a pagan, and as the general explained before, with a haunted sleep-deprived look in his eyes, that is what the king's order was for. Our dudes already felt exhausted just thinking about it. They just realized they were going to spend a lot of time running in circles. He could not understand why they were so busy. Meanwhile, a heavy thunderstorm rages at Count Brelin's castle. Inside of the castle, his son coughs, heavily sick, and his father watches in concern and fear. His son's sickness was getting worse by the days, and a hooded figure was telling him to open his eyes. However, he refused, saying he knew what would happen to all those who fell into necromancy. He refused to use necromancy on his son because bringing back someone from the dead would just create a moving corpse. However, the hooded figure counters that their necromancy is brand new, and that they now practice the true necromancy. They told him to serve Tessernik, the true power of darkness, so that he could use it properly. If he did that, then his son would not die, and curing an illness was not an act of evil. They reminded him that his son was still young. They asked if he would truly accept the death of his young child, saying that it was not the natural logic of the world. His son held his hand and called to him, and the poor count could not take the despair anymore. The 7 goddesses' order were no help to his son, and if this was an opportunity to give his son a new life, then he was open to taking it. So, he turned and agreed to convert to Tessernik, and asked if they would accept him. Later, in the Breland County, in an inn on the outskirts, the general of their team explained that it was time to start collecting information. It was important that no one found out that they were from the king's order. They were told to use a method that seemed unrelated to pagans, and showed them a wanted list. Helen Krat was a notorious wanted criminal in the capital, and he was talented at disguises, so he had not been caught yet. The commander asked if he was related to the incident, and the general laughed that he was not at all. He was actually one of their members. However, they were going to pretend to be bounty hunters chasing this criminal while they investigated. They would pretend like they were collecting info as bounty hunters, and split into 3 teams while they investigated. The king walked around with Kald, and the girls walked around and asked questions around the city. Meanwhile, at the Grand Count's estate, which shines beautifully in the afternoon light, Barrows and the general questioned the count. They explain that they are adventurers and bounty hunters. They believe a criminal has come to the country, and they asked the Baron to assist them. The count agreed that a dangerous man on the loose was bad for them too, so he would happily help. The general then stood and promised not to do anything troublesome. They said goodbye to the count and left, which surprised the commander. The general said that they would return to the inn, and the commander had no idea what they'd even accomplished. He wondered what was the point of the meeting if they barely did anything. However, the general grins that what they did was enough, and he has already caught on to what is going on. Now, it was time for them to exchange information about Count Breland. The king and Kald had heard that he had lost his wife early, and his son was his only family. They had also heard that his son had been suffering from an incurable disease that even holy healing spells could not resolve. It was the perfect case for cultists to take advantage of. Another suspicious point was that the crime rate dropped down drastically. The count even led the charge to expel many criminals, but if so, then those criminals would have moved to other towns. Then, Kald asked if they had heard any of such tales on the way there, and Alice admitted that a mass disappearance was a common occurrence when dealing with necromancers. Then the general gave his report of how they had visited the count and they had found something interesting. He had noticed that every window was fitted with thick curtains as if there was a need to block out the sun. A familiar tale, which meant that a vampire was living there. Meanwhile, in the castle of Count Breland, the count sat at a table and asked his son if he despised him. His son smiled, cradling a glass of blood, and he asked his father why he would despise him when this was his first time realizing that life could be so calming. All humans already needed to kill in order to eat and survive, and he merely drank what he obtained through the order without doing anyone any harm. His diet changed, that is all, and it was better than death, so he happily sipped his glass of blood. His father was glad he thought so, and he was relieved that his son had not changed. His boy was still polite and vigilant, and he could see now that the Order of the Black Gods was not heretics. They were merely the new truth of the New Age, and when Tessernik set foot on those lands, and created the haven that balances life and death, his son would be able to live a normal life again. He knew that it might be uncomfortable, but he asked his son to endure it a while longer. He would not make his son live in that body forever. The next day, someone called out, and it was Sarathi asking Alice why they needed to keep investigating when they knew what the necromancer was. However, the priestess reminded her that they needed to remain vigilant until they found absolute evidence. They just needed to wait a little longer, but suddenly they were approached. Someone came up to ask if they were the bounty hunters, and the priestess asked if there was a problem. The man admitted that they had found a wanted man, and the count informed them to tell the hunters about it. This was a great shock because the wanted man was fake. So, they met up once more and talked about how the count informed them of the hideout of a non-existent criminal. The criminal apparently returned to sleep there every night, and they were to ambush him. It was a trap, and the general looked pleased about it, especially since they were to meet at night, so they were obviously going to get attacked by a vampire. The general laughed that the count expected them to fall for such an obvious trap. The king thought that this made things very troublesome, and that if they ignored this information, the cultists would know that they suspected them. If that happened, they would then do digging into them. The group from the Hunters Guild looked surprised and realized that he was right, while the king wondered why they were so daft. Cal asked the captain what step they should take when dealing with a dangerous trap that was more advantageous for the enemy. The general thought about it, then admitted that they had no choice. They had to play into the enemy's hands. In a cabin in the woods, the hunters had gathered and everything seemed calmer than they expected. So, the young swordswoman decided to ask how strong vampires were, and the general said that they were a few times stronger than humans, but they were nothing to fear. She then asked if ancient vampires were strong, and Keld admitted that they were often discovered quickly. It was usually impossible for them to stay alive for long. Then, she asked what would happen if a mage or an aura user became a vampire. Apparently, they would just lose the ability to use aura or magic, so they would become weaker. The general asked if they were worried, knowing that it was bad to be arrogant. But they were the kingdom's cream of the crop. A vampire was nothing they could not handle. Suddenly, he hesitated when there was a large flame shot at them, followed by an even louder explosion. The cabin fell to ruins, splinters popping out of the flame. The priestess had been able to protect them, and the general cursed that their enemies had chosen a sneak attack. They had sensed no one approaching, but a small gathering of wicked people had formed in the woods. Just as the villains suspected, the king's order was involved, and they grinned that no mere bounty hunters could dodge such a strike. They were shocked to see a vampire using aura magic, and then recognized Sir Durald, the strongest knight of Count Breland. They could not understand why an aura user would become a vampire, and the general was not sure about the details, but it was clear that the count had cooperated with pagans. With the authority of the king's order, he declared them the enemies of the goddess and the king. He asked them to kneel and receive the judgment by the king's orders, but the enemy laughed. They asked who to kneel to, and the general warned that judgment would be enacted if they did not oblige. All the hunters geared up their powers, and they rushed ahead to punish the attackers in the name of the king. The vampire soldiers yelled for their own fighters to battle in the name of Tesranic. There was a mad dash and wild fighting. Both sides fought valiantly and attacked without showing mercy. The members of the order got in a few very good hits, and the vampire groaned, calling them the damned dogs of the royals. He refused to be beaten, but the priestess cast the goddess light, and the vampires burned. They screamed that the priestess should get attacked first, and a fighter with an axe charged at her. However, the captain got in the way, refusing to let them harm her. He then summoned something that made the ground rumble and a golem arose. The golem flung aside the vampires like it was a slay queen, and then the general fired lightning blast at their enemies, electrocuting them in blue lightning. He hoped that he got the vampire, and then watched amazed as the others fought. He had thought that they were only a fourth circle mage and his knights, but they were very skilled as they cut down the vampires around them. Barrows didn't even flinch as he made quick work of the enemy, and the king always hit his mark with his shots as a mage. The captain was shocked that people that skilled were only just known now. However, the situation right now was not about whether they would win. The fighters of the order still fought valiantly against the vampires. Despite them giving it their all, this fight hinged on the fight of the aura users. Even if they were both red knights, he wondered if Sarathi, who had less experience, could really defeat Durald. The two aura users continued to clash as they fought, the whole battle hinging on their success. The fight raged on, and the leaves on the trees shook from the force of the battle. The swordswoman slid backwards, and Durald paused. He smiled and said that she had a pretty face for her age and that her skills were not so bad. He laughed that she was still no match for him, and she panted heavily as she caught her breath. The fight raged on, and both sides fought hard for the sake of their cause. The vampires yelled to each other and told each other not to retreat as long as they had Tesranic's blessing. Even if they died, the god of death would gift them with resurrection. The king sighed that their opponents regenerated way too fast, and he did not think there would be any vampire aura users. Even the commander admitted that as Durald joined in, it would cause them some trouble. They also wondered if their swordswoman would do alright by herself. She dodged another strike from the vampire, and groaned that she had more energy and experience, but she could not even find an opening to attack. She had thought that vampires lose their mana or aura and would need to build up dark mana from the beginning, so she could not understand what was going on. Meanwhile, Durald kept shouting for her to witness him, and the great power bestowed upon him by the great Tesranic. He could use aura despite being one of the dark. So, she asked her team if vampires had any weaknesses since they must have killed quite a lot in their days. However, our dudes just admit that if they knew any of such weaknesses, the battle would have already ended. They were so weak that he had never bothered finding out anything like that, and he barely recalled much about them. She groaned and asked Barrows for help because it was more than she could handle herself. He laughed that people without aura could be no help, but he could try possessing her again since they had 2 more times left. She wasn't interested in going mad though, and worried that something would go wrong. This would not do, and she needed to solve this problem by herself. She swung her sword, determined to blow him away with her quantity attack. The dudes wished her luck, and she swung with a mighty shout. The vampires seemed overwhelmed by her attack and were shocked that it came so suddenly. She then raced at him with her sword raised high, and he laughed that a small increase would make no difference. She swung her sword at him and he dodged. He yelled that he had the power of Tesranic on his side and he did not fear her. She groaned as he attacked back, but managed to hold some ground as she got pushed back. She could not defeat him by overwhelming him with her aura either. She wondered what to do when suddenly Barrows communicated with her. He told her that her aura usage was too inconsistent and that she wasted too much energy. She needed to know how to use her blows at the right time and place. She had to recall when he possessed her body and to remember how it felt. She had to control her aura and concentrate, so she closed her eyes, which was not the best move while fighting an enemy. However, it worked and unlocked the experience that was still in her body. She just had to unite her mind and purify the energy that flowed to her sword. She took a deep breath as powerful energy began to turn and twist inside of her, growing with each breath that she took. She channeled all the power in her sword, and the vampire knight watched in surprise as her aura became sharper. He yelled that he had no idea what she was plotting, but it would not help her. She thought of what the commander would do if he were in her situation. Her eyes snapped open and she swung her sword in a wicked slash that cut the attacking vampire knight. Her eyes widened when she realized that her attack worked. Riding on the wave of her success, she attacked again and again, cutting down the vampire knight where he stood. She could now see how the commander was able to easily play with her. She should not have been targeting the opponent's blade or body, but the opponent's intentions. The vampire knight groaned as he fought and yelled that she had a card up her sleeve. However, he thought that it was futile. He attacked her again, but she managed to block his almighty strike, much to his surprise. She identified where the opponent was going to move, and he leapt at her with rage. She aimed for the starting point before momentum built up, and then slashed the opponent before her. The knight coughs blood, and the king is thrilled to see that they will not need to help her. Even Barrows is happy that she finally got the hang of it. The general was happy that Sarathi did well, and they had also finished things with their opponents, so things were looking good for them. The vampire knight groaned in confusion, wondering how she suddenly got so good. He thought it was impossible for anyone to defeat him with his new power, and he wanted to kill the swordswoman, even if it cost him. He fired up and lit his sword in red aura, shouting that it was all or nothing now as he swung a huge slash right at her. The others were shocked, knowing that using so much aura would also burden the enemy, but he did it anyway. He groaned and asked if he was entrusting it to his regeneration to handle it. They yelled for the swordswoman to move away, however, she felt that there was no need to dodge. She could also regenerate a new limb, even if she lost one, thanks to her new friends. So, she was willing to put in her all and swung her sword with all her might and power. She counters his slash with a swing of her sword and a mighty bright light fills the atmosphere, as well as the force from the clash of powers. Rubble flies around, and her teammates have to brace themselves in the storm's blast. The general groaned that was too risky and looked around as the smoke cleared. The vampire knight's head rolls off his shoulders, and she stabs the head to the ground so that he cannot regenerate. She is bruised and panting, but she did it. They ask if she is okay, and the priestess heals her after the battle. She thanks the priestess, who says that they should thank her since she saved them all. Thanks to her help, they now had clear evidence of the Count's sins, and they would take the vampire's head back to the Order. They contacted headquarters because they were ready to serve justice to Count Breland. Later, in the castle of Count Breland, their group charges in, shouting that it reeks of vampires. They have no intention of letting them escape, and they use their powers as they fight evil in the name of the goddess. The priestess sanctifies most of the vampires, burning them away. They search for Count Breland and his son, and the Count sits in his office with a dagger, calling on Tessernik. He asks his new god to have mercy on him as he trembles. However, his son is not in the castle and servants have fled in the daylight with their young master in tow. They do not know when the hunters will reach them, but all he can think of is his father. He swears to have his revenge on the king's order. He swears in the name of the great Tessernik that he will have his revenge no matter what. The little boy swore to have his revenge on the king's order as he ran away. However, his chance came sooner than he thought as they were stopped in their escape attempt. The servants demanded the new people reveal their identity, and it was just our king and his knights. He grinned that they could not just leak a trail of necromancy power like that, and the servants were horrified to see the members of the king's order. They asked their young master to run away, but our dude was not about to let that happen. He activated some of his necromancy powers and seized them all in one giant hand. They were shocked to see someone using necromancy, and the king said that they would get straight to the point. The swordswoman judged him while his victims screamed. Once he was done with them, he absorbed their necromancy power. The swordswoman felt that she could not get used to this stuff no matter how many times it happened. The king decided that they were set and lit up a fire with a snap of his fingers and burnt the bodies. The swordswoman protested that they needed the corpses to report their findings. However, the king said that would not do since he had already eaten up all the darkness of the end that they had. The commander worried that he was accumulating a lot of necromancy power, and it would not be manageable with chaos magic alone. The king admitted that the situation was not allowing for sluggishness, and the swordswoman asked if he was worried about something. He admitted that Durald and Straff worried him. Straff had been able to maintain his holy powers despite becoming a necromancer, and Durald had still been able to use aura. The commander thought that it was fine since they took care of them. But the king was worried that they did not lose their divine powers even after touching darkness. Energies did not mix. That was why to learn something else had to be given up. However, now, that rule had been broken, and the darkness of the end was allowing mages to retain their magic while using necromancy, and the same went for aura users. The commander said that was normal though, since archliches, death knights and whatnot could use aura. However, in those cases, there was a side effect of becoming undead or losing their sanity. Now, they could use their old power along with necromancy, and the strong who steered clear of necromancy will now begin experimenting with it. This was an opportunity for stagnating power to grow at a rapid pace. Even the 4 martial kings and the 3 grand mages could become their enemies. So, just getting a little bit stronger would no longer be enough, and he had to gather as much power as he could. Back at the King's Order headquarters, they were congratulated on their good work on their last mission. Their team captain had highly praised their conduct, so the Grand Master was wondering if they would be interested in officially joining the King's Order at that very moment, considering everything that had been done and Tarman's strong recommendation. The king was overjoyed and happily accepted, and the Grand Master welcomed them to the King's Order. The 3 cheered that they would be eating well that day, and to celebrate their entry, they needed to start working immediately. They were shocked that they had a lot of work piled up and had to start immediately. It was a toxic work environment. They all wondered if it was even the right choice to enter such a crazy organization. So, the days of working passed by, and they annihilated cultists left and right. They also taught necromancers a lesson using necromancy, which the necromancers protested. But it wasn't like they lived to tell the tale. They also faked a lot of reports to hide what they were actually doing, and stole a lot of darkness in the end. Then, they did the exact same thing over and over again. They beat up bad guys, beat up necromancers, and wrote reports again, and stole darkness again. Time passed by and it was all getting very repetitive. The king gathered all the darkness he had absorbed, and got to work separating the chaos mana. Then, he combined it all over again. It bubbled before him like a brew of alien stew, and the newly created mana shone and sparkled in the light, much to our dude's delight. He had finally been able to reach the 6th circle. Meanwhile, at the King's Order headquarters, rumors started going round in the order. The gossips had all heard about how Karnak became a 6th circle mage, and they whispered about it in the hallway. He had been on 4th circle just recently, and they could not believe his immense growth. He of course took the chance to gloat about having God-given talent. He started prattling all about a made-up explanation he came up with, worried that he'd be found out as a necromancer, but the swordswoman knew people didn't know how the darkness worked and that he should please stop. Suddenly, they heard a ruckus from the Grand Master, and he popped out laughing that they might have a Grand Mage on their hands. He was relieved that no one suspected him of darkness, and the Grand Master had more good news for them. The captain's spot on the 7th division was empty, and he wanted our guy to take it. Our dude was surprised, and the Grand Master said that everyone agreed on it. They had assessed his contribution and he was more than worthy of the position. People had great expectations of him, so they wanted him to keep working hard. He said that he understood, but deep down inside he knew that a promotion meant that he was getting even more work. 1 week later, at the southeast Eustal Kingdom border fortress Arthra, in the basement of the central tower, there are screams. Someone prays to Ladiel, asking that the sinful soul is offered the slumber of repentance. Nilia, a rank 2 inquisitor that was a follower of Ladiel, the goddess of the sun, and was of the King's Order, the 7th division, stood outside the door and prayed as horrible screams came from behind it. She knew that the Inquisitor had to torture cultists, but she was grateful that she got to stay outside while Captain Karnak conducted his torture. Meanwhile, Barrows was the one beating the nuts out of the poor cultists while Captain Karnak just sat back and watched. The cultist even offered to tell them everything he knew, but the commander just wanted him to keep screaming. The king remarked that their latest victim was lasting quite a while, and the swordswoman said that they had done enough pretense for the day. Milia would believe it so they could stop for now. Suddenly, the commander reported that the cultist died. It was finally the king's turn. Tesranik was the destructive god of darkness and death, as well as the Genesis god that would bring a new order into the world. The king was not impressed with the things the corpse was saying at all. It was another bust, and every last one of them believed in their god. No one knew any useful information. The swordswoman thought about it and said that they had at least discovered that their dark order was ruled by 3 leaders. They had 6 cardinals and 13 archbishops, and each region's bishop ran their own small organization. They had only captured normal priests, so they would have no useful information. They needed to at least catch a bishop to get anywhere. The king hoped that they could find someone higher up the ladder soon, and wondered why a big incident was yet to occur. Later, in Arantel's office, the Grand Master went over the new mission report, and admitted that there was a rumor that someone in Drenta, the capital, cooperated with the cult. Meanwhile, the team wondered why he was acting so shaky. Our dude asked who the suspect was and the Grand Master admitted that the suspect was the 2nd prize of the Eustal Kingdom, His Highness Alford Luden Eustal, the prince himself. Finally, they got a big job. In the Eustal Kingdom, the current king, King Wiscott I, has 2 sons who fight fiercely over who would succeed him. There was the first prince, Lloyd Luden Eustal, and the second prince, Alford Luden Eustal. Although it made sense for the first prince to be the heir to the throne, the first prince actually had a tragic backstory. Melia of the Count Feeler family was accepted into the family through an arranged marriage and became the queen. However, over the last few decades, their inability to have a child was considered a large issue for the future of their families. So, in order to gain an heir to the throne, the king had no choice but to accept Calpia from the Marquitalian family. 3 months after she joined the family, there was news of her pregnancy, and the child born was Lloyd, the first prince. The king was blighted and announced Prince Lloyd as his successor in the name of the goddess Allium. However, that was also when Queen Melia was finally able to have a child, and the young boy was named Alford. He was the second prince. The royal household was in dismay because the eldest first prince was pitted against the direct bloodline second prince. Since it was hard to determine who was more important, deciding on who would succeed the king was a tough decision. The indecisive King Wiscott I then told both boys that he would decide once they had become adults, and he ended the conversation. The commander scoffed at hearing that the king brushed off the decision, feeling sure that the decision brought plenty of repercussions. They had arrived at the capital Drenta, on the eastern outskirts of Delastars. The Death King on the other hand thought that the king's decision meant that one of the boys could become king if something unfortunate befell the other boy. To no one's surprise, the two families that had served the princes for over 20 years had never stopped fighting. The commander laughed that it was a whole mess, and the commander mumbled that if there was not enough reason, then choosing based on their ability or personality seemed the easiest thing to do. However, the king explained that based on personality, Lloyd was calm and collected, making him suitable for the throne. Meanwhile, Prince Alford was violent and arrogant. As for their abilities, they had not had a chance to show them off since they were still too young. The swordswoman then asked why the king was yet to select the firstborn. However, the commander reveals that Prince Lloyd is incredibly weak. Ever since he was little, he had never been healthy for long. Despite learning sword skills for a long period of time, he could not demonstrate his skills. On the other hand, the Prince Alford was strong and was even talented in martial arts, which complicated things. The commander then asks who reported that the Prince Alfrod was colluding with the Dark Order. Our dude says that it seemed it was a spy planted by Prince Lloyd, who likely stumbled on the news by accident. Since the prince was concerned, he sent an informal report to the king's order. Before Commander Arantel took over the king's order, he was the vice commander of the Imperial Knights. That was how he was able to recognize the first prince's handwriting. Anyway, that was all he knew, and they arrived at the meeting point. Our dude had been told that he'd be sent a messenger for more details, and our commander asked if they'd arrived at the place to meet the prince's spy. The king tells them to head inside, and the trio walk inside. They can immediately tell that the spy is the nervous guy sitting by himself, and they approach him with confidence. The spy nervously asks what they want, and our guy thinks his acting is very bad. He raises a crest and asks if the spy is the one who received orders from Prince Lloyd. The spy flinches and realizes that they were the ones selected by Sir Arantel. The commander notices that the atmosphere around the spy had suddenly changed, and he asks him to state his identity. The spy asked what he could do, saying that all he could do to state his identity was to show his face. The company was shocked when he revealed who he was, because their informant was none other than the Prince Alford. They could not understand what was going on, and were surprised that the one who reported Prince Alford was Prince Alford himself. The prince acknowledges that they are confused to see, and he says that he is aware that the face that he wears is Alford. However, he is not Alford. He instead reveals that he is Lloyd Luden Eustil, the first prince and the rightful heir to the throne. The Death King was confused and said that the prince was telling him that his soul had been swapped with his brother's. The prince acknowledged that fact, and the Death King realized that he hadn't noticed because he'd been too shocked to see the second prince. Now that he looked closely, he could see that the wrong soul was in the body. The shape of the body did not align, so his soul was disrupted. The prince figured that his situation was hard for them to believe. However, our dude believed there were plenty of spells and necromancy that could make it happen. The prince brightened, knowing he did a good job in contacting the king's order. He had been sure that they would recognize that he was under a necromancy spell. The prince eagerly asked if ordinary magicians outside of the king's order would recognize necromancy, but our dude explained that it was impossible for the mere magical eye. Our dude is only able to understand since he can see the facts. Then the prince asks how a non-necromancer is so sure that he is who he says he is. The king responds without missing a beat that it would be odd for him to act as someone else, and say that he reported himself. Members of the king's order have basic knowledge of necromancy too, and the prince accepts his explanation. The prince groans that there is no way to use magic and prove that he is under a spell. The king asks them to consider the facts of this event, and asks the prince to tell the story of the soul swapping. The prince reveals that it all started 5 days ago, and that day, he'd been going through his daily treatment of holy healing magic before going to bed. The commander was surprised that he got daily treatment with healing magic, and the prince pointed out that everyone knew his body was weak. The commander worried that even zombies were healthier than the crown prince. Without much issue, the prince had fallen asleep, and the entire estate was always protected by a holy barrier anyway, so he had nothing to fear. However, he had woken in his brother's body and was shocked at the strength of necromancy. The king pondered and mentioned that something did not make sense to him, because that meant the enemy cast a spell strong enough to pierce through the barrier. Then, they must have prepared something within the estate, but there was nothing. The prince goes on to explain that he woke in an odd place all tied up, and he had groaned in pain. He had felt strangely healthy, no pain, and his fever was gone. His joint pain had also disappeared. Then he gasped when he realized he had such a muscular body and was seated in the middle of a necromancy circle. He worried that he had been kidnapped and looked around in fear. Suddenly, 3 cloaked figures came in and asked if he was awake. He'd woken in an odd place with unknown people, and he asked what they had done to him. They chuckled that he was unaware and magicked up a mirror to show him. He stared in shock and recognized the face, but it was not his own. He and Prince Alford had switched bodies as a result of the great power of someone they called Lord Tesserinic. He asked who they meant and realized with horror that they were cultists. He asked why they did this, and someone called his name. His eyes widened as he recognized the voice. It was Sir Sebastian, one of Alford's henchmen, and he thought it was surprising that he betrayed his brother. However, the henchman was confused, and Prince Lloyd asked why they had put his brother in his weak body. The henchman chuckled in amusement, and the prince realized that his brother was behind all this and that he had been betrayed. He asked what they wanted from them, and they'd said nothing in particular. All they needed him to do was to stay locked up and be good for them. They closed the door as he rushed to it, but it was too late and all the windows had been blocked with steel bars and the doors had been locked. However, he did not hate staying there. He wasn't sick and he got great meals that made him happy to eat without stomach problems. Even the commander and the king agreed that there was no joy like eating good food, and the prince was elated that they understood. The swordswoman gets them back on track and asks the prince how he escaped. The prince then admits that after hearing his story, they will not be able to believe it. The prince tells them all about how he was able to escape from his sudden prison. He had just finished feasting on a very nice meal with pure satisfaction, and he wondered what they were planning to treat him so well. He wanted to leave, but there were so many eyes on him. He saw that they took utmost care of his brother's body, and he could escape if he used this body as a captive. With the life force he felt surging within his body, he felt he'd be able to escape. The guards groaned about needing 4 elite knights to serve the prince just one meal. The knights laughed that Sir Sebastian was too worried, and that the prince did not even know how to hold a sword. They knocked on the door and told him that it was mealtime. He told them to come in, and the door swung open, but he'd been lying in wait. He swung his hand, chopping brutally at the first guard and knocking him down. Then, he pulled out a sword, much to the surprise of the knights. They could not believe that the so-called weak prince had been able to aim for the knight's weak spot accurately. They thought that Prince Lloyd would be helpless even if he were in his brother's body. He laughed at their surprise, but he had learnt the sword even in a dying body. He had only needed to rely exclusively on strategy and technique, and use the least movement possible. However, now he was in a healthy body, and actions spoke louder than words as he eagerly personally showed them. He attacked all the surprised knights and they shouted and groaned in pain. The maid watched all the knights fall with terror in her eyes. The prince looked at her and she squealed. He smiled that he would not harm her, but he told her to stay in the room for a bit. He closed the door and cursed at his brother, who had only been strong because of his strong body. He now needed to carefully escape, but he paused when he stumbled on some guards, which he felt was very unlucky. He reached for his sword to take care of them, but the guards just greeted him and asked him where he was heading. Surprised, he froze and realized that the guards were not alarmed. They had no idea who he really was, and it turned out that only a few people knew that their bodies had been swapped with necromancy. Thanks to that, he was able to hop over the walls while pretending to leave for a stroll. However, he had nowhere to go with this body as he did not think that his servants would believe him. So, he had asked the king's order for help and hid himself in the slums. That was the end of his story. The king decides that it would be better to capture the cultists who had done this. However, the issue was that the cultists were hard to find once they were in hiding. They had likely already evacuated the manor where he had been held and moved elsewhere, so the prince asked what they should do and asked if the king's order would send scouts to track them down. They cannot waste time when they do not know what the Prince Alford was planning, and they need to make the necromancers come to them. The prince then decides to act as bait to lure them in, and the king has to kindly explain that he will not be enough. The knights would be enough to capture him alone, and the prince nervously asked if there was another option. The king smirked that they would prepare a bait that no necromancer could refuse. A few days later, in the outskirts of the Drunda hideout of Prince Alford's supporters, the evil prince's henchman wonders where the captured prince has escaped to and hopes that he has not contacted supporters. However, someone else says that will not happen because the spies they planted in the palace have said nothing so far. He is the Bishop Detzraz of the Order of the Black God, a necromancer and a fifth circle mage. They said that if the prince was plotting something, they would know. The other guy also admits that they had also prepared measures against the prince's possible moves. The other 2 supporters are Old Gelferant and Cale Bayorson, both subordinate necromancers. They admit that they need to bring Prince Alford's body around at the right time. The necromancy spell that the bishop cast was called Soul Ring, and it was still intact, which meant that they did not have problems yet. Even if there were no problems, they had to stay vigilant and wondered if there was a way to track the prince's body down. However, if that was possible, they would have already done so. All conditions needed to be met and even casters of the spell were not sure what they were. Their only method was to keep searching for them on foot. Suddenly, someone races in to inform Sir Sebastian that the prince has been located. The bishop is shocked, and they tell him that the prince is in the south near Dalian Street. That was where Prince Lloyd's supporters were, so it did not seem suspicious at all. They asked if their men had made contact with the prince, and it did not seem like it, which was a relief. They would instead send the Crimson Flame squad after them. They were a personal squad that worked for Prince Alford. The bishop was relieved that he could finally recapture the prince. Meanwhile, over at Dalian Street, a cloaked figure moves around in the dark. Many steps follow behind this figure, and the prince stops to ask if the followers have business with him. They simply say that they have come to get him, and he asks them if he looks like Prince Alford to them. They are surprised at his statement, but they sympathize since they had heard that he was not in his right mind. They explain that they have been ordered to bring him to a certain place, even if he resists, and that they do this for his sake. Suddenly, our swordswoman lands before the prince and asks if he is okay. The guards are shocked and she dares them to try and take the prince away. They are chilled by her sweep of dark aura, and feel a sudden chill go through their bodies. They immediately believe that they are feeling the evil spirit of a necromancer. The guards cry out as they all get beat up left and right, and shout that a necromancer has taken control of the prince. They do not know how to face that, so they turn tail and run. The running men are shocked when a portal opens in front of them and tentacles slither out. They scream as they get attacked by foreign creatures, and they scream as they get knocked around. They scream in pain as they get defeated by the monsters, and the prince watches in horror, wondering if what he is witnessing is truly magic. 2 days ago, in the slums of Runta, which was the hideout of Karnak and his party, the prince had asked what would be the bait for necromancy. He asked them to elaborate, and the swordswoman marveled at how quickly the prince had fit in. The king reveals that necromancers, who are often scared to be outed as necromancers, often don't reveal themselves unless fighting a strong enemy, which was why they were going to set an enemy with the same conditions. They would use a necromancer as bait, and the prince spat out his food. He was shocked that they mentioned such a thing, but the king explained that the bad guys would expect them not to call the order on them if they used necromancers. Necromancers can also steal each other's powers, so to become stronger they would surely appear. The prince was hesitant about collaborating with a necromancer, and the king explained that it would only look like he did. They would use the confiscated belongings of necromancers and use magic to trick them, and it would be indistinguishable from the typical necromancer. Of course, he is lying. Excited, the prince says he understands why the king's order would see such a thing as necessary. However, the swordswoman suspected she would be the one forced to act like a necromancer, and she was right. The Death King asked how the prince was doing after the battle, and he said that he was fine. At any rate, it really looked like real necromancy was being used back there, but our dude just smiles and says that their magic is high quality. The prince saw one of the guards escape and he wonders if that was enough, and our dude agrees that the one who ran away will report to the others. He grinned and said that they just needed to wait until the necromancers took the bait. Meanwhile, Alford's supporters were shocked to hear that necromancy had been used. The guards admitted that the Crimson Flame squad had witnessed the whole thing with their own eyes. The bishop was speechless that Prince Lloyd was cooperating with necromancers. The necromancers led by the bishop grinned and said that was their specialty, so he could leave it to them. The henchmen agreed since Detzra's skills were trustworthy, and the necromancers promised to bring the prince back. The bishop grinned that they took down the Crimson Flame squad, so the necromancers were not normal, and he wanted to take every drop of the power. Later, at Dalian Street, the bad team had a plan to deal with the necromancers who were likely coming to steal their powers. The two lower necromancers would bait the necromancer, and he would stay hidden and ambush them. If it succeeded, then he would give half of the power to them. The lowers agreed but were annoyed that they were the bait. It was now time to begin, and in the name of Tesranik, they activated their necromancer powers. Their powers weave a wave and they call for the accursed souls of warriors to arise. The souls respond and crawl out of the watery depths of the underworld. The necromancers command the ghouls to find their master's enemies in the name of the darkness. The ghouls march off in the dead of the night. Meanwhile, our dudes are also watching, and the king is not surprised that they sent necromancers after them. His surveillance magic has tracked them, and the prince nervously asks if all those ghosts are out to get them. The commander grins that the enemy is in a rush, and it is time for them to get armed and move. The prince's job was to wait while they moved out by themselves, and he was surprised that he would not be joining them. The king explained that it would be bad if the prince got ambushed, and they would question the necromancers and return with information. The prince thanked them and offered to leave it to them. However, he hesitated and asked them why they were taking all sorts of weird items with them. The Death King laughed and said that it might look silly, but it was an optimal anti-cultist armament. Meanwhile, the watery ghouls continued their march, and they passed through walls undisturbed. They peeked into restaurants, scaring a couple on a fancy date, and many people screamed as the ghouls raided the town. While the people continued their screams and cries of terror, the commander and the swordswoman listened on. The redhead was angry that those jerks were roping in innocent townsfolk, but the commander pointed out that the people were not being harmed. The redhead pointed out that there was no need to scare the people, and the commander shamelessly said that if people did get hurt it would make more corpses, and that would mean more servants. She growled and asked if that was the thought process of all necromancers. The commander laughed that it was clearly not everyone, just as a ghoul popped up behind him. The redhead is alarmed and there is a great exclamation. Meanwhile, someone lights up a lantern and realizes that one lost spirit got cut down. They immediately try to determine its location, and they turn when a screaming noise alerts them to the power of darkness being used. They call for their minions to attack the enemy while they retreated. The ghouls charged forward, determined to fight the enemy before them. Meanwhile, the lower necromancers were sure that they had found the enemy, but something about them was rather confusing. The enemy sliced and diced at the ghouls with green magic lighting their weapons. The commander used a mop and the swordswoman brandished a frying pan. The two had no idea why they would carry such things and wondered if it was some sort of necromancy they did not know about. However, the commander had spotted the two and told the redhead that it was time to commence their plan. They suddenly started doing something that the necromancers could not understand, and they swung hard at the attacking ghouls. The necromancers decided that it was best to take care of the two first, and asked the lost one to open their eyes and reach out their hands of chaos. The commander was impressed by their skill as the hands were raised, and it had been a while since he saw the necromantic field. However, he quickly got moving and easily dodged every last attack. The necromancers were shocked that he was dodging everything by just moving around. The swordswoman also trampled on all of the summoned hands and hissed at them like a wild creature, much to the necromancer's alarm as they could not understand why she was so tough. The commander yelled that it was time to do something and the necromancers wondered what they were talking about. They suddenly throw both weird objects into the air, and the necromancers fearfully wonder what is going on. The two fighters stab their swords into the ground with a scream, and a flood of green necromancy powers rush at the two bait. They were shocked that their necromantic field got swept away by the other two's necromantic energy, and the commander grins that they will not be able to face them with such tricks. One of the necromancers demands they explain what spells they are using and the other says that he will handle this. He summons the powers of hell and his clothes get ripped, his skin becomes red and his muscles get bigger. He transforms the dark power into the power of chaos within him, and his feet get bulkier. He screams out and black dark lightning flashes around him. They are shocked that he became demonized, and the commander leaves the demon to Sarathi. The aura user clashes with the demon and the demon growls when she deflects his attack, saying she must have strengthened herself a bit, but she was no match for his demonic form. The swordswoman smirked and said that he was not much for having turned into such an ugly shape, and he growled in rage, deciding to end things soon. He reared back his head and spat out a purple light at her, but she spun her frying pan and swept down with her sword to destroy his attack. The monster stared in shock, unable to believe that she had cut through his attack a second time. Whenever they swung their weird weapons, all their attacks got blocked. They asked what the two were using, and the king smirked that of course, they were clueless when his knights were deflecting using literally nothing. The demon necromancer curses that they used their powers again to block his attack. The other necromancers cannot understand why their attacks don't go through every time they shake their fingers. They cannot understand what is going on, and the king smiles that, of course, they do not know. He laughs because the power is literally nothing. Both the frying pan and the mop are mere distractions to hide the power of darkness. Even if they believed his story, they would figure things out soon. The other necromancer keeps watching and notices that something is odd. The necromancers were here but the death energy was strangely coming from some other place. He soon traced where the energy was coming from and he realized that the enemy was using misdirection. They had been playing with them this entire time. He yells at his colleague to stop wasting his time on the fools, as they are just distractions for someone else. He points out where the real necromancer was hiding on the rooftop, and they click their tongues now that the enemy has figured it out. They now have to quickly finish things, and they leap at the demon that calls them fools since they have figured their spells out. They yell that they will not fall for their attacks anymore and all they need to do is defeat the real necromancer, so he shoots purple in the right direction. It flies at our dude and it smashes through the green barrier, seeming to finally make contact. The necromancers laugh at how they have effortlessly defeated their enemies, but the king is still standing and he laughs that he is happy that the idiots finally figured out what he was doing. He says he is sorry to break it to them, but he is perfectly fine, and even though his companions' weapons are ordinary, they are still very decent fighters and their attacks will hurt. Both fighters lunge at the necromancers with killing intent in their eyes and they beat them both black and blue. They soon have both lower necromancers tied up with darkness rope, and Barrows slaps them awake. They growl at our team and promise to get revenge, but they cower when the Death King stands before them, reeking of such intense power. He is definitely a real necromancer, and he laughs and says that they will have a nice chat. They can already tell that they cannot handle him, and they cannot allow themselves to become a nuisance to the order. So, they call on Lord Tessernick to take refuge in his arms, and they cry out as a bright light shines on their chests. The swordswoman curses that they committed suicide, and the king mutters that the whole ordeal is pointless since he could just summon their souls. His green hands grab their souls as they try to escape and he drags them out of their bodies like they are petulant children, even as they beg for him to wait. They cry out as the king plans to take them to a calmer place so that they can talk to them. There is still some necromancy powers left in the bodies, but they can just take them in case for later. Prince Lloyd reported 3 followers, which means there is still one more necromancer hiding, and they can use him as bait. The redhead asks why the last necromancer has yet to make a move, and they all wonder the same. However, the other necromancer bites his lip in fear because he did not even have the time to intervene. He was shocked at how quickly his juniors got defeated, and that they had fallen for a gimmick and let down their guard. He wondered what to do now as he could not tell how skilled the other necromancer was. He could not let them go like this, and he needed to follow them and take away all three of their powers. Later, in some abandoned hall in the slums, the king asked them to tell them everything about themselves. They were the direct underlings of Bishop Detzres, and they introduced their names. Following the orders of Cardinal Hudel Grenthal, who was in charge of the Eustil Kingdom, they had been told to intervene in the following events alongside Bishop Detzres. The king asked about the bishop and they explained that he was a necromancer within the order and he was also a fifth circle mage. He was receiving orders from the higher-ups as they were going through with their mission. Our dude realized that a mage and a necromancer had teamed up, and figured that the man in question was the one in hiding. He then asked what they did in order to pierce through the holy barrier and cast a curse on the prince. They explained they did not need to pierce through the holy barrier. That was because the target of the curse wasn't Prince Lloyd but Prince Alford. They were shocked that the prince cast a curse on himself for his plans, and the curse had been utilized to switch bodies between bloodlines, and they could easily go through with their plan by using the prince, even if they had no access to the other prince. If that was the case, our dude thought that the target does not have to agree for the curse to go through. They were able to do that by using a magic mirror to show Prince Lloyd's appearance and make it look like he was participating in the curse. They used necromancy to fix the issues with the magic spell in order to perform an impossible curse. However, our dude asked why the prince wanted to switch bodies with his brother and asked if there was anything to gain from that weak body of his. The two were about to reply but a large explosion blasted into their interrogation chamber. The bishop laughed that this was the end and that it was better for them to surrender now. Someone asked who he was talking to, and he turned with shock to see our dude standing unhurt. He was surprised that they managed to dodge that even while casting a necromancy curse, and our king just smiles that he has good intuition. The bishop tells himself that he needs to focus and he calls on the shadows of the bitter cold to come forth and open the night of Akron. The room around them was swept in ice, and thick icicles jutted from the ceiling. From the depths of the cold, two giant ice beasts arose, and the redhead marveled that the space itself changed. It was similar to when they had faced Straff, and the commander admitted that they were about the same status too. It was similar in that there was not much they could do, as it looked like both mana and necromancy powers had been used together. The redhead worries that this is a dangerous situation, but our dude says that it was not much of an issue the last time either. All they needed to do was to apply a barrier just like they did with Straff, and dark purple magic turned and twisted around the icy chamber. The bishop is surprised as the magic whips his ice beasts, and they begin to melt. He is alarmed at his necromantic barrier disappearing, and he is shocked that they know how to dispel his curse. He was not expecting this and now he cannot let his guard down. And the bad guy says this is not the end of the power given to him by his Dark Lord. He summons the wandering spirits and tells them to follow the Master of Darkness. The spirits pop out and whisk about in the air. The commander notices that they are similar in the aspect that they both try to use numbers to their advantage. He asks if they should run away like last time, but the king smirks that all they need to do is defeat the enemy. He summons many magical projectiles and smiles as he summons scorching magic bullets. They all fire at once, shooting through the summoned spirits, and the king laughs that they are not the same as before. Our dude cried out for some scorching magic bullets, and the magic whips through the air and tears the summoned spirits asunder. The bishop is shocked to see 6th circle level destructive magic being wielded by a necromancer. It should only be possible if someone was blessed by Tesranic. The Death King then told the redhead that it was time that she stopped pretending to be a necromancer. She agreed and then activated her sword aura, charging at the spirits with red light surrounding her, and also tearing them asunder. The enemy could not believe that his opponents also had an aura user. The king summoned the nemesis ghosts, and told them to follow their master's command and to destroy the enemy. The bishop groaned under the weight of the attack and threw his spirits against the ghosts, gloating that this would not be enough to defeat him. The ghosts clashed with the spirits in brutal combat of flashing blue and green, and the bishop could not believe that someone who did not worship Tesranic could use both necromancy and magic at the same time. He was sure that it was another trick, and growled that he would not be fooled as he summoned more magic in his hands. The commander fought valiantly against the spirits, and the swordswoman was in awe, wishing she could move like he did. He thought that was rich coming from an aura user. Suddenly, the bishop yelled at them and called them foolish pagans. He was going to show them the teaching of a true god, and the Death King felt both necromancy and magic being summoned, so he knew this was bad. The bishop called forth some earth souls, and they popped out of the earth like angry demonic golems. The king was surprised to see a golem because he had thought it would be better than that, but the commander reminded him that golems could be pretty annoying. The swordswoman even offered to take it down, so they decided to leave it to her. However, the bishop was not done yet and he was still bubbling and commanding his summon. From the green arose a giant knight, in battle armor and everything, with a giant sword to match. They were shocked and the swordswoman groaned because she knew this kind of ghoul, and it did not have a physical body but it was able to use proper swordsmanship. However, our dude assured her that he knew its weakness. The bishop kept calling on his black god to bless him, and the armor from the summoned ghost knight flew to the summoned golem. The shoulder pads fell on as well as the knee fittings and the helmet. Soon the summoned, and very physical golem was all decked out in knight armor. The bishop laughed darkly that he would defeat his enemies using his newly summoned golem knight, and the king was annoyed that the bishop had successfully fused his magic and necromancy. A powerful golem that could use death armor swordsmanship was not an easy thing to fight. The bishop laughed that this was the true dignity of a god, and the golem raised his mighty sword and swung it. He sliced down to the earth and the sword slash raced to our heroes. The redhead leaps into the air and charges at the slash, and she groans as she counters it. The slash was stronger than those of most high-ranking demons, and the king sent an authority attack to back her up. Unfortunately, most of the projectile bullets just bounced off the golem's armor. The king sighs when that doesn't work, and the commander asks what they should do now. The king laughs and admits that he did not think that far, much to the horror of his associates. She shouts out for them to dodge, and a huge blast rocks the area. They all jump back, and the commander says he will defeat Deathsriz while the swordswoman should focus on taking down the golem knight. They both launch at the enemy, and the bishop is shocked to see the commander coming for him. He asks the golem knight to stop them, and the golem turns on the commander. He dodges the attack and the swordswoman launches at the golem. She screams that she is its opponent and slices at its giant head. However, she barely scratched it and it turned to face her. It swipes its mighty sword at them and they both have to fall back. The knight stands at attention and the evil bishop celebrates the authority of a true god. The redhead could not attack it and she wondered what they could do. The commander asks if the young master has a trump card since he has been calm since the beginning, and the redhead insists that he should hurry and use it if he has one. They will die at this rate, and he grumbles but agrees to use it. He sets his hand on the ground and says that they will leave the questions for later, because in order to fight a golem knight, they need to be strong. The commander wonders why he is saying something so obvious while trying to look cool, but the king grins that he is talking about a different type of strength. He prepared something just in case, and the rocks began to rumble underneath his control. A dark creature begins to form before them and the souls he had captured earlier ask for his command. They are the necromancers from earlier and they are full of necromancy. The bishop is shocked to see his underlings, and they summon their own powers. Cursed warrior souls rise and the other soul receives the power of hell and becomes the authority of chaos. The bishop is shocked that they can control the necromancy of dead necromancers, and wonders how they can use such a complicated spell. The Death King tells his servants to follow his command and to defeat his enemies. The bishop shouts for the golem to kill them, and the golem launches at the risen souls. The demon necromancer attacks the golem as well, and the golem tears him down too. The golem flings away its enemies, and the bishop laughs that they are foolish and that all their struggles are pointless because those two could not kill him. The demon flung away the attackers, and the evil bishop laughed that they could never defeat him, and that his underlings were not even a match for him in his past life. The Death King asks him what he is talking about, saying those two were not the only ones here. Suddenly, the golem knight gets knocked back by one of the projectiles, and our dude tells his colleagues to stop standing around. They race at the knight, the commander laughing that it finally feels like a real fight. The king calls for his servants and they respond. He tells them to eliminate the enemies of their master, and all the ghosts and ghouls jump into action. The bishop gets annoyed that they are using numbers to their advantage, and orders the golem knight to protect him. The golem knight does just that and swings his large sword in many dangerous arcs in a bid to protect his master. The swordswoman ran in from behind him, and slashed at the golem knight. She is not sure if that was enough to defeat him, and the demon necromancer roars and pounces at the golem knight again. He attacks the knight, and the knight swipes at them again with his large sword swipe and she dodges, happy that it worked. The bishop curses when the armor breaks, and he doesn't notice someone running at him from behind. He turns too late to see the commander launching at him, and he cries out for the golem knight to protect him. The knight does that, and the commander yells for the swordswoman to keep fighting. The commander, swordswoman, and the demon knight all attack the golem together and more of the armor of darkness gets destroyed, much to the bishop's anger. The onslaught of violent attacks continues, and the bishop curses at the attackers, shouting that they could not challenge the authority of his dark god. He calls on the great god of darkness to give him more powers, and he is enveloped in thick green necromancy. The knight somehow gets stronger, and they groan. The commander yells for the swordswoman to move, and they just manage to dodge as the knight ferociously swings his sword. The fighters are pushed back, and the commander sighs that their attacks are working but they are not enough. The king agrees that they need something a lot stronger, so he now has no choice. The bishop asked for the golem knight to eliminate the lower necromancers first since the others were all weak. The golem roared and charged, and they admitted that this was looking bad. The swordswoman offered to help but the king said that there was no need. She was confused, but as the knight swung his sword, the king admitted that the golem was walking right into the bomb on his own. The chests of the two necromancers began to glow as the golem drew closer, and there was a large explosion. The corpses and the lanterns bounced around in the rubble and the bishop screamed. He called them demons for exploding the corpses, saying that they could not call themselves humans. The Death King thought that was rich coming from a necromancer, and their enemy no longer had any more tricks up his sleeve. The bishop is shocked that they are strong and cruel. He is sure that they will try to torture information out of him. He needed to end this now and he called for Tessernik to take his soul away. They sighed that he had killed himself just like his underlings. However, he was surprised when he tried to summon his soul, and it failed. Then, a huge green circle surrounded his body and sucked away his soul. The king was horrified that it was a soul transfer by contract, which meant that the enemy had set it up so that his soul would go straight to Tessernick after death. The soul was disappearing along with their chance to get more information. The king cried out in dismay that they had lost their opportunity, and it was a shame that they underestimated him and lost their chance to gain crucial information. However, the swordswoman pointed out something, and they saw the remnants of Detzra's soul. The bishop was shocked and asked how they were here instead of his god since he was supposed to go straight to the death god. The king was surprised, but the commander had already figured it out and he grins wickedly because the bishop had messed up his skill. They laughed that the bishop had messed up his spell and that was why the basics were important when dealing with magic. They grabbed his soul and he screamed in horror as our dude carted him away to talk. They found a small place that seemed safe enough, and the commander figured that this place was safe and they should get started. The king agreed because he was sure the prince was also tired of waiting. He needed to focus even harder this time, and the swordswoman was surprised that he would not just use the same method as always. The commander explained that the young master was skilled so he could use necromancy so often, but it was very dangerous magic. She saw how he had a spell cast for soul transfer, so they expected him to be prepared for interrogations as well. The king asked the bishop to respond to the call of his new master, and a dark magic wrapped the bishop's soul. Suddenly, a large green demon popped out and the commander identified him as the demon of insanity, protecting him. There was a saying that when one stared into the abyss would stare back, and the demon of insanity was the type to drive people insane. Anyone who tried to approach the soul could lose their minds, but the swordswoman noticed something odd. For some reason, the demon of insanity was the one going insane, and our dude was shocked. The commander reminded her that the abyss could stare back at anyone who stared into the abyss, and the king resents being called worse than the demons within the abyss. The demon of insanity quickly evaporates and the commander is pleased at how easy that was. The king is still upset that his soul is that horrible and he wonders if he ought to try to be nicer. Then, he questions the bishop and asks why the princes switched bodies, and asks what made the Prince Lloyd's body so tempting to him. The bishop scoffed that Prince Lloyd's body was not tempting at all, and that the curse was just a part of the plan for Prince Alford to take the crown. They were surprised and asked for further explanation. The group of good necromancers finally returned to the prince and ask how he has been. He is relieved to see them again and asks about their battle against the evil necromancers. They say that they have taken care of them, and they have also discovered how to undo the spell and learned of his brother's wicked plan. The prince is very pleased to hear this and tells them to tell him what they have discovered. They tell him that thankfully the swap is only temporary and the prince intends to return to his own body. He also raised a charm which was how they were going to return to their bodies. On the full moon, once the item used for the curse was placed under the moonlight, and a drop of fresh blood from Alford was dipped on it, then they would switch back. It did not even need to be performed by a necromancer, and the prince understood now why his brother had needed to capture his body so badly. The king then explained that regarding why the second prince had swapped bodies in the first place, it turned out that he had a plan for the night of the full moon. The prince asks about the plan and our dudes explain that the prince was going to assassinate the king. The prince is shocked to hear that his brother was going to assassinate the king in his body, and he was going to visit and stab him with a knife. He knew the king would not be wary of his first son, and when the bodies were swapped back, he would get away scot-free. The prince could now understand, but the plan would be hard to execute with his frail body. However, even if the attempt failed, his plan would still work, and the first prince would either end up imprisoned for life or executed for trying to harm the king. The prince now sees that the situation is indeed very bad, and he wonders if his brother will make some moves now that his body is missing. He realizes that they need to keep their guard up until the night of the full moon, and he is now tempted to drink poison just before they swap back and permanently damage his evil brother's body. The Death King tells him to restrain himself, explaining that if his body is harmed, it could interfere with lifting the curse. The prince pouts that this news is unfortunate. However, the evil prince might not still realize that his body is missing. After all, the prince was staying at his good brother's quarters and he was using necromancers to contact his subordinates. However, now that his necromancers were gone, he would have no way to contact them. The king asks the prince to guess what his brother would do after losing contact. Of course, a normal person would delay his plans, but his brother was insane considering he used necromancy. The king agreed that the brother would move forward with his plans. The prince sighed that it was such a mess and that no one would believe such a thing. The swordswoman then asked if the prince even needed his original body back since it was so weak and frail. He is now in a healthier body, so she asks if that is not better, but the king points out that possession does not last very long. If the body and soul did not match, there would be side effects and both would continue to clash until a person went mad. The princes are related by blood, so they have 3 months tops, much to the prince's shock and horror as he realizes he did not have many opportunities to swap bodies. He groaned and rubbed his head, wondering if there was no way to stop his brother. He would break his own legs if he could, and the prince considered that he had already captured one high-ranking cultist, so he could use this opportunity to forge a golden connection. He asks the prince if he wants to teach his brother a lesson, and the prince agrees, which makes our dude grin because he now has a plan. Back at the Eustil Palace, the second prince groans as he tries to stand. He is already losing his mind in his brother's body, and he has no idea how his brother has managed all these years. He swears that today will be the last day and it is the day that will bring the night of the full moon. He lost contact with the cultists, but he cannot delay his plan. Spending another month in his brother's weak and sickly body is out of the question. Suddenly, someone flings open the doors and tells him that he has to evacuate. They yell that he must move and follow them immediately. The prince is confused and wonders what they are talking about, so they just pick him up since he is wasting time. He is baffled and asks why they are doing this, and they explain that Prince Ulford is swinging his sword intending to harm him. He is shocked to hear of this, especially to hear that his brother is acting rashly. He wonders what his brother is plotting. Meanwhile, the prince stuck in Ulford's body continues to swing his sword and shouts for them to kneel before the future king. The guards ask what he is doing, and that the king will not stand for this. However, he shouts that his target is Lloyd and Lloyd alone. He yells that he did not wish to shed unnecessary blood, and they would soon be his subjects. He thinks that his brother should have known that he also had the power to ruin his reputation. The captain of the guard yells that the prince is mentally unstable and they must restrain him without hurting him. The guards rush forward and the prince yells at them to back down. He fights the guards, scraping the ground with his sword. He swings left and right, and eyes the guards behind him. He knocks them down as well with effortless and fluid movements. The guard is amazed and wonders when Prince Ulford's swordsmanship improved so much. It would be hard to suppress him without hurting him. Suddenly, the prince spots a bright light in the evening sky, and a huge blast explodes where he stands. The guards are shocked and wonder if the prince's supporters have attacked. But 3 knights run over instead. They call out to Sir Zeliad, but he does not recognize them. Our dude introduces himself and he explains that he had been sent by the Prince Lloyd. He is from the king's order and they are shocked, wondering what he is doing here. He says they are direct subordinates of the royal family and they have a letter signed by Prince Lloyd. The guard sees that they have evidence to support their claims and wonders if the prince planned this. Now, no matter what happens, the captain can easily pass on the blame to them. The prince swings his sword and yells, asking who they think they are and that no one can stop him. The king's order offers to restrain Ulford, and the guards just tell them not to hurt their prince. Our guy is well aware and his lady knight charges, and the guards are shocked to see an aura user. She launches at the prince and he narrowly dodges her attack. They both make eye contact, basically asking how far to take this act, and they agree to keep at it, so they keep fighting. The guards cheer for Lady Sarathi as she fights the prince, and some guards even try to get a closer look at what is happening. She screams as she delivers a strong blow to the prince, and he groans dramatically in pain. He falls to his knees and the guards acknowledge that it is over. They were amazed that she was able to restrain him without drawing a drop of blood, and our dude tossed over some restraining magic which wrapped tightly around the Prince Ulford. He raged and asked how they dared, demanding that they release him. The guards were grateful and offered to take it from there. They were going to imprison the prince until they received orders from the Crown King. However, our dude said that he had something to tell Sir Zeliad. This finally catches us up to the latest chapter of this manhwa. If you guys are interested in seeing more of this story, be sure to let me know in the comments down below, so I can cover the latest chapters as soon as they're released. And if you want to see more similar stories, head on over to my channel for countless playlists that I've poured my heart out to narrate. Lastly, if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing so you can stay notified for future uploads. Until next time.